Yo, guys, what's up?
Hello, sir.
Hi.
Good
Uh,
evening.
good evening. We're gonna be talking about some. Gonna be building some ice today. Remember, like,
Mhm.
what's the name of the movie? Blade Runner, right? Like, I make eyes, right? Is this something like that?
I don't remember that, but
Yeah, it
I
was
was
the.
thinking of They Live for some reason.
Yeah, there was a guy who was specialized in making eyes for the androids. Actually,
Oh, nice.
yeah, that's kind of cool. All right, so let me
Do
just
you
share my.
remember? Do you remember They Live?
Man,
You
I
put on the glasses and you could see
yes,
like these
I
skeletal
I don't
faces.
think I don't think I ever watched the movie. I saw many clips of it, right? Kind of like
Yeah,
it's like obey and yeah, that's
right,
cool.
right. It's
Yeah,
cheesy, but it's hi.
no, it's pretty awesome. Yeah, great concept. But yeah, some of the lines as well, like some of the funny lines in there. Yeah.
Bangora and Gorzone. Yeah,
Oh yeah.
I read that you. I mean, I watched the interview with where you spoke about how you used to love those magazines. That was like my go-to at the
hmm
coffee shop or the corner store. I love the Fangora
Oh
magazine.
man, that stuff
So
like when
funny.
I only had one in my entire life, and that was the one I was like going over and over and over again. I
Yeah,
probably
your
still have it.
friends that you
Yep.
do you know the one that you got? I'm sure you know. I
I'm
wonder
gonna
if
have
you
to
could
check.
find it.
It's probably in my garage. I have a bunch of magazines from my, it's like childhood, and it's probably there. I'm gonna have to dig at some point and then post on my Facebook my
Yeah,
findings. Yeah. All right,
cool.
man. I'm gonna start this today. Gonna share. So this guy here is from the previous class, right? He has a interesting look. Let's see. Yeah, it's interesting. Look, he this guy he passed away a couple of years ago. He had progeria, which is this condition. I mean, like it makes you age like very, it's like fast. So he died when he was like 17. He looked like a little old man like that, and they don't grow a lot. It's like the proportions are kind of interesting. So this was my project for the last class. But during this project here, I actually decided to revisit the way that I was building the eyeball, and I ended up like creating this one here, which is going to be the base for my characters from this point on. I actually revamped the iris completely. It's like there's a lot of detail that I added in there, which I'm gonna show you guys how to do it. I mean, like first thing you're gonna notice is that if you go to your dashboard and you check the class for this month, let me just click in here so I can show you. Resume course, blah blah blah. So let's try it. Like week 3, there's an iris sculpt time lapse that was posted uh, before. So I want you guys to check that one out because that would it's more self-explanatory than what I can do here. It's just a time lapse showing you how I built the entire thing. I can show you the base mesh so you guys can have a good idea about how it looks like. And this is kind of like everything with clay build up. I can do like a quick start so you guys know the tools that I'm using for this, and then I would just recommend you guys to just watch it. It's just like blocking the forms and then like refining. It's like basically like just clay build up everywhere. But I'm gonna give you a quick demo for that. And then, but from this point on here, I mean, like you see like the way it turned out in here. In relation to this one here, there's a lot more detail, right? And this stuff here I added a couple of months ago, actually, when I was working on that other model. If I turn off here, it looks more like this. So basically, one thing I did was to actually subdivide this until I had like 852,000 polys, and then I went full on HD. But the thing is, like, although it's only like 18 million polygons for the whole thing, which should be fine to work in the whole thing in HD at the same time, right? Like since I'm working on 36 million polygons for the face. ZBrush doesn't quite work with logic, right? So 20 million polygons doesn't matter. It doesn't go HD to the full thing. So if I go HD here, look what's going to happen. So it only went HD for like 6 million polygons, just that little hole in there. It's all about like, I don't know exactly how ZBrush treats those things, but I have the impression that's kind of like topology. So what I did, I actually created a polyframe, polygroup for this area here of the iris. And that way I believe I can go full on HD. So yeah, the whole thing becomes HD. So I was able to sculpt it. But this is kind of like the one step forward from that other one that I had in there. And this is basically like just a clay build up with, it's like with a lot of intensity instead of like just 3. It's just using a tiny little clay buildup like this. But I'm gonna show you like the the rest first. So let's see if I get something like stronger than that, like say 20. So you see like each one of those lines, probably stronger. Let's try. Each one of those lines is basically one of those. It's like just going like this, and then smoothing out at the end a little bit. So like all of those guys here, they're done like manually going like all the way. And there's obviously I was looking at some reference at this point, but also making up a lot of stuff. But at the end of the day, I wanted to have an eyeball that had more of those tiny little details, it's like more of that stuff. And what I did as well was to create a cavity map. So the cavity map works very well for this type of stuff. Let me get out of, let's keep in HD just for now so I can show you. So let's pretend, I'm kind of getting like ahead of myself. I didn't even explain how to build an eye, but just out of curiosity here for you guys, I'm just gonna color this whole thing white here so you can see like how the cavity map looks like. So this is like white, right? And I'm gonna do like a flat coloring here. So if I select my cavity, let's go like masking. Once you have everything sculpted for the eyeball, this is a good trick, it's like just get stuff in there. So you can go by mask by cavity, can crank all the way to 100, and then you do something like this, right? But then you can just do like a blur mask like this. Look how cool it looks like. A lot of detail in there. And then from that point on is a matter of like just like inverting it, right? So if I want to create like the dark cavities, just invert the whole thing. You can paint like a very dark color here. Let's start with black, for example, just to show you how it looks like. And then fill object, and then I reverse it. And then here I can pick like any color, and then very desaturated normally. And then you can just start painting, basically like add like different variations and stuff. But it's cool to just see like the type of result you get, It's like you can actually blur this thing even further. So for example, if I get just like to blur the RGB in here, you can actually do this. So you can get this interesting kind of intricate detail, because sometimes you expect like the displacement map to do that, it's like to generate those, it's like enough cavities so the light is going to get trapped in there. You're going to get lots of shadows, and sometimes it doesn't quite work. So that's why I do this trick with kind of baking in a cavity in there. So let's just go back in here. Let me just get out of here. Let's talk let's go part by part. Right? We're not gonna get too crazy here. So let's see. In terms of the construction of the eye here, so the way that I approach like the construction of the entire eye is it's a very small number of objects. In the past, if you remember, like we would build an eyeball like this, right? Which that's I'm gonna show you guys how I built this one. But we would build an eyeball like this, and we would create another copy of this eyeball inside this eyeball. We're going to shrink it a little bit, and we would reverse this into like a flat to concave kind of shape, right, at the end. And then we would have like those two eyeballs, basically like one inside of the other one. But in this case here, instead of like using a full eyeball, I actually chopped it and made into a disc, because it would be a waste to have a full eyeball in there if I'm never going to see the rest of it. So the principle here is I want to use this disc right here. And then the eyeball is going to go right in front of it, right? Like that. Let's do like a transparency in here. So you can actually see, let's see, transparency and ghost, just transparency. So you see right there, you can see through it. Basically like this area here is the buffer I'm going to use to actually blend between those two colors. So what's going to happen is that like the outside sphere in here, this one is going to be a combination of the cornea itself, which is the transparent part in here, the lens itself, and then the sclera, which is the whitish part with the veins and everything, right? So it's everything is going to be painted within the same object. So if you look at the highest resolution, it's going to look something like this. And then we're going to have like a transparency map that's going to be circular, and that's going to make this whole lens transparent, so we can actually see through it until we reach that side right there, and then we can see the iris, right? So if you do it correctly, if you have like this surface very close enough to the cornea itself, we can actually do this transparency thing here without ever revealing like this edge, right? If you go too crazy with the transparency, you might get in trouble and start revealing some of the edge. But You know, it's like if you do correctly, you're going to get something more like this. It's kind of like the example I have from a previous class, very saturated, but it works for what it is. Let me see if it's going to pop up. Okay. So you see, like that's the transparency I'm talking about right there. So you never see like the edge of the disc, right? The disc ends around here. So my transparency is just created this milky kind of, detail in there. So let's look at those objects in here as a just like the simplified version of them. So this one here, if imagine this is like being something without the deformations, right? Like it's just like a, let's just smooth it out. So if it's something like a disc, just imagine without any of those details. So it's basically a disc that, it's like it ends a little bit flat around here, but then I go as far, I don't go that far in. So basically like it's concave, but it has two steps. So the first step, basically, it goes in a little bit with that detail right here. Like, I don't know if you can see it. There is a peak right there at the very edge. It goes down, and there is another step right here. So like 1, 2, 3 steps, basically. And that's kind of like the way to observe this, like when I was looking at some references, but you might have a different impression, It's like the thing is, like when I render this with the correct color and refresh and everything, it works very well. You can see in my characters, it's like they have some life in there. So that means it's kind of like it works. Even though you might find like some other stuff, like, it's like in the reference that you might think it could be built differently. By all means, I would say like just give it a try. But a best reference you can find is something like this. For example, like you just look for let's see, macro photo, something like that. And then you're going to get a lot of those references like this, And then
I put a link in the chat.
Oh, cool. Yeah. So those ones actually, you can see even like the type of lighting that they're using here. They have like this kind of like honeycomb, it's like they use one of those grids in front of the softbox. And what the grid does, it actually makes the light rays more directional. So it kind of like you get a little bit more detail, right? So it's kind of like it's a broad kind of surface because like it's a big soft box. But at the same time, it treats almost like each one of those little as a spotlight, kind of like, so it makes everything directional so you can see more detail. Because remember, the softbox in general, if you don't use something like this, everything becomes more diffuse, right? But in this case, you can see a lot of the detail. And then I noticed, like, depending of the type of eye, I mean, like if it's like a lighter eye, you have this tendency of having like more of those little tendrils, like much smaller detail. And then as you get a little bit more towards like a brown eye, it's much more porous in general, And then you get some stuff that's kind of in between, like this one here. You see it's a little porous, but at the same time you have the tiny little microfibers in there. But in general, I mean, like when you look at an eye like this one, which is a brown eye, it's very spongy, right? It has this aspect of kind of sponginess. And this one doesn't have half of the detail as the one that I sculpted, right? And I could have a little bit more noise on top of it as well, it's like to create something more spongy like this, right? But I mean, like there is a lot of room for interpretation as long as you get like the main components of the eye. For example, like you see, there's this kind of like those little waves right here at the transparency part that I mentioned. You have those little waves in here, right? Like right at the edge, they go across like that. Some of them have more visible, some of them are not visible at all. But see, like there's another one. It looks like the same eye in there. This one, let's see another one. We can see something. This one is going to be too small to see anything, but you still see the little, oh, actually it has a good resolution here. This one is lighter and it's still very porous, right? But see those little waves around the edge right there. So that's kind of cool to have something like that. That's why I build those little, it's like right around here. I could have gone a little bit, stronger, but it's just enough to, to break up the surface. In terms of construction, let's take a look at in Maya first, what we're going to need in terms of proportion, right? Proportion is very important. We already spoke about it in the past, but let's get a little bit more in depth in here. So I brought like a bunch of different eyes in here. Let me just hide those ones. I don't need them right now. And so this one we already spoke about, like the general size for the eyes, right? Let's see if this is working here. Let me just stop any render. Yeah, it's good. So let's go like to the top view here. And then that's basically the proportion that I'm expecting you guys to work with, right? 24 millimeters, that means 2.4 centimeters from this point right here, right? Like all the way to this point here. So basically like the size of the eyeball, the diameter in there. In real life, I mean, like the eye, it's not a complete sphere, right? Like it kind of like it's a little bit more stretched in a way or the other, but it's never like a perfect sphere. Just like they say the Earth is not a perfect sphere, right? Because we all know it's flat. No, actually not. It's kind of like some people think like it's kind of like pear-shaped or a little bit elongated or something like that. So with the eyes, the same stuff. Imagine like it's kind of like constrained in there as well. Like it's inside of this pocket. You know, it's like there's bone in there. So it's probably like a little squished in a way or the other. But for the purpose of sculpting and then making the life of the riggers in our pipeline easier, we treat as a sphere, and then later on, if we need some extra deformation, then that's added with some other deformers. But for the purpose of like sculpting and sending this to a rigger, it's normally like just like a simple sphere, right? So what you're gonna have to do is basically like make sure you have around like a 24 millimeters after the smooth, right? So that means that if you're using like a super low resolution, when you smooth this out, it's going to shrink in some of the sides. I'm going to show you in when I model something like this for you guys to see how I approach it. But in terms of the distances, that's what I'm expecting you guys to do. So the iris should have around like 12. So that's going to be half of it. And this is all averages, right? You're going to find some people with smaller, a little bit bigger, eyeball a little bit smaller, a little bigger. And then this is here is basically what they do when you're going to go like do like a eye exam, right? They're going to measure the distance between your pupils. So this is the pupillary distance here, which the average is about 63 millimeters. So when you put this whole thing together, you get something like this. It's like you notice that the eyes in here, to get the pupillary distance correctly, you have to do that little rotation that I mentioned before. Remember, like in, I think one of the first classes I mentioned that I normally rotate the eyeball about like 2 to 3 degrees outside, right? So outwards. So both of them are rotated like that. And then from that point on, from the front view, then you can actually measure the pupil right in the middle right there, right? To get the pupillary distance, not from an eye that's actually looking straight on, like 90 degrees, but after the rotation itself. Then you're gonna get the correct measurement in there. So the 4 elements in here, right? Size of the eyeball, 24. Size of the iris, 12. Distance between pupils, 63. And making sure that before you measure, you actually do the rotation. In this case, I believe it's like 3 degrees for each one of them. But I go anywhere, like depending on the character sometimes, the thing that's very interesting is when you have someone with a very long caruncula, for example, like the little gland that you have, like the inner part of the eye, right? When it's very long, sometimes the eye, the impression you have of the rotation of the eye changes from someone who has a very tiny one, for example, caruncula, that's a tiny little piece in there. Sometimes the eye, if the caruncula is too small, the eyes look a little bit kind of wall-eyed, it's kind of like they look like they are going outwards too much. And when you have them a little bit bigger, it kind of like self-corrects and you have the impression that, yeah, it's kind of centralized in that area. It's a very interesting effect, when I was modeling my wife, I mean, like if I look at her in real life, she looks like she has the eyes a little bit more, it's like apart, but it's not true. It's just because her carunculus are very tiny. And then you kind of like, you measure it like in the context of the eyeball in there, like within the hole, it looks like it's a little bit more open than they are actually. It's kind of very interesting. It's kind of like an illusion. But yeah, so that's the main concept in here. The other thing that it's worth noticing here is that when we are doing like a drawing, right? We are learning how to draw. We are doing like the distance between eyes, for example. Like, let's say, like if I get this little guy here, and then obviously his proportion is going to be very different because he had like very unusual proportions. But let's say something like, let's see, turn on perspective. So the distance between the eyes in here, probably going to be kind of similar to what we're going to find in the book, for example, like from corner to corner of the eye. So we're going to measure and going to have probably like the same amount, same distance between those, between here and here is going to be the same for both sides. And then between the inner corner here to this inner corner of the other eye, you should have exactly or very close to another eye. But when you measure this, we actually measuring from the inner part of the caruncula all the way to the outer part here of this little wrinkle, right? So you have an impression that the eye is actually bigger than it is, but inside of it, I mean, like he's making this curvature, right? Like it's curving in there. Let's just add an eyeball here. So there's this curvature in there, and then the caruncula covers that whole gap that's missing right there. You see there's a gap in there. It's kind of like, so if I add the caruncula in there, it's going to look something like this. So it covers that whole area, right? So if I turn it off, you see like there's a gap in there. So when you do that, it looks like the eye is actually bigger, but the eye is starting to curve towards the back. So when you look from the top like this, it kind of, it makes you wonder, for example, okay, what happens with the whole thing about like the distance between the eyes is exactly one eye, right? Because here we see there's a big gap in between them. It's because we are actually compensating for the, it's like if I take the caruncula here as a reference, like I have it here. So basically like the end of the eye is going to be shown kind of like right here and not right here, right? At this edge, it's going to be a little bit more right here. So definitely when you measure from this all the way to the other corner, then you're going to transfer this, you're going to have a third eye in the middle. But in terms of the size of the eyeball, it's not like three eyeballs. Like the impression we have is that, oh, you just have to put like three eyeballs against each other, right? Like really close to each other. And then you're going to have the correct proportion. Is not true. I mean, you need a gap in between them because you have to take into account the caruncula and the corners of the eyes there. So this is in terms of proportion. That's what I'm expecting from you guys, right? And always remember to go to your preferences, right? And then under settings, set up to millimeters or centimeters, right? In that case, you're going to have to do a 1.2, 2.4, and 6.3. But then right after you finish with this entire thing here, make sure you go back to your settings and switch back to inches. So actually Arnold is going to use centimeters, so it should be fine with centimeters. So for the render part of things, I just did a cancel here. I hope it doesn't crash. It just gave me an error. It's fine. So for the construction of the eyeball, right? I mentioned before that if you subdivide a sphere, for example, it tends to shrink in a certain axis. What I mean is this. So if I go here and I create like the basis of my eyeball, I'm going to create like a polygon primitive sphere, right? And then let's just isolate this one for now. It looks like this. And basically like the top is actually, it's like my poles are at the top right there in the bottom, right? So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to go to my channel here, and I'm going to check the construction of this sphere here in the history. Let's see how it was constructed. So by default, Maya creates a 20 by 20 sphere, right? I'm going to switch this to 8 by 8, something like that. And then the next step I'm going to do, I'm going to just like delete those poles right here, and they're going to tell you why, those edges. What happens is that if you let's do this now so you can actually see what I mean. So if I subdivide, I'm going to use this part here, this front here as the iris itself, right? It's easier for us to cut if you have like something like this that's more circular to use as the iris. But what would happen if I just simply subdivided this, right? I would get like to my modeling mesh, and then I would do like a smooth. Look at those ugly poles right here. So basically I would create like a star in there, and then all those other weird things in here. And that would not work out very well when we have like this as a lens for the iris, because we're going to get some pinching, especially if it's a very, very reflexive surface. You're going to definitely see some pinching right in the middle. It's going to be kind of weird in there. It's going to be almost impossible to recreate like a smooth surface. And imagine like in real life, if you have something that's not completely smooth, you're going to end up like seeing something your vision is going to be distorted, right? It's a lens. So if you have like a pinch right in the middle of your lens in there, you're definitely going to see the world very distorted, kind of like how I see it. So let me just get to this. And now let's subdivide this again, just to show you the difference here. And now look at that. Now we have like a nice and square right in the middle right there. So that's the type of topology I'm looking for the lens of the eye, right? So we're going to do a couple of things here. So the first one, I create this sphere. And it's cool, but if I subdivide it here, look what's going to happen. If I look from different angles, oh, it's not centering it. So basically, like you see, like it's basically like a nag. From the top, it's gonna look perfectly circular, but from the side, it's gonna look like a nag like this because I didn't have enough sides, just like 8 sides, right? So the tendency when you use the subdivision is that that compresses, right? It shrinks. So it's shrinking more from the sides than the top itself. So the poles are still in the same spot, but the sides are shrinking. So it becomes a nag like that. And I don't want that. So what I do normally, I create like another copy of it. So let's create like another primitive in here, sphere, polygon primitive sphere. Now I have this one, and then instead of like going 8 by 8, I'm gonna go very crazy here. For example, like 60 by 60. Sorry. And in that case, now what's gonna happen is that I have something I can conform to. So what I'm gonna do next, I'm gonna get this very low resolution mesh right here, which is the 8 by 8, right? Let's just see here in my time. So I have this sphere in here and this sphere in here. So I'm gonna hide this high res first. So I'm gonna subdivide this one once. Let's do, because it's still low res, right? I just did this to be able to create like the loop in there to make sure that everything is looking good. But right now, let's see, let's just do like a subdivision. Let's do like a mesh smooth, right? So now I have this one here. It's still very long, right? But at least it has more support now. So in this case, I can actually unhide that one. And I can say, okay, let me select the super high res one first. Oh, let me just delete the history first. To delete history, you can go to edit, delete by type history with those 2 objects selected, right? And now I can click the super high res one. I'm gonna click the, before I do this, let me just like scale this one up so it's a little bit more conform to that, just like closer to what it is. Just smooth a little bit like that, scale a little bit like that. So it's a little kind of like it's around it a little bit better now. So I'm gonna go back to the high res, control, click this one here, and I can go to mesh and then transfer attributes. And I can just turn on vertex position, turn off everything else here. And then for sample space, you can either use like, I think local should be fine, but world should be fine too. And then everything else should be off in there. So I'm gonna just apply it. And now this is actually created a shrink wrap. So they are basically like on top of each other now, right? So I'm gonna just delete the history again. I have a shortcut in here. And then now I can get rid of this guy here. But instead of getting rid of it, let's do something here. Let me just flip the pole first. So I'm just gonna rotate this like 90 degrees, right? Like that. Let's check the box in here, 90. Perfect. So, and then what I can do, I can actually use this to use my measurement tools to create something that looks with the correct proportion, right? So right now it's very tiny there and everything. But remember what we did before. If I do like a create and then measure tools distance, let's see if I have like the correct stuff here. So setting millimeter, right? So let's do, oh, canceling always gives me this error. It's funny, I have to save it. Bug my bugs. Right, so if I click this and I go around here, 55, I need what? Like I need just like 12, right? Like actually 24. So 24 millimeters, so I'm gonna be something like this. So to tweak this, I can do something, a little cheat in here. So if you click just this little constraint, you see that right now I have the translation at 50, right? So I can just do like, for example, 12. Oops, that's the wrong thing. So let's try 12 here. And then I'm gonna grab this constraint, just a little one here. I'm gonna put like minus 12, something like that. So I got like a exact 24 right now, right? So I can actually grab these guys and move them to around here. And let's grab those both of those guys. And let's try to get them to conform to that. That's gonna be, you know, around that, something around here. So now we're gonna have like the correct proportion for the eyeball, right? 24. Now the next thing I'm gonna have to do is I have to create a 12 as well, right? So I'm gonna do create, then I'm gonna go to measure tools, distance tool, click this one, with shift. If you don't click shift, it can go anywhere, but with shift, it kind of snaps to like horizontal, right? So we're gonna click this guy here. This is gonna be -6. This one is gonna be 6. So we got a 12 in there. And then let's just move it around here, right against that. So now what we can do, we can use like this old one here that we had, and which was like the high resolution, and we can use it. Actually, let me do it differently. Let me just duplicate it. So I'm gonna duplicate it, and I tell you why. After I'm gonna combine it and create a single object. It has the little, you know, sorry, the cornea popping out of it. In terms of how much it pops out of it, I can show you a couple of references I use, but none of them tell me exactly the distance that they pop. So yeah, I kind of like, you know, I do something until I find that looks correct, but it's not like a, you know, it's like a super precise kind of thing. I can show you some of the stuff I have here. So this would be kind of like close to the size that I expect to see. If I turn, for example, like if I select my camera and I bring this to like 100, so a very flat camera, it's going to look a little smaller in relation to that, right? But then there's a transparency that happens as well, and that's going to end up like making the iris looking even smaller. But let me just see if I can find around here. Just pull this aside. And then let's see. So we're gonna go through this construction first. It's not gonna be a full-on tutorial, but I have to give you like the pointers how to start the whole thing. And then let's see, workshops. And let's try this. So some of the, the things you can check. I mean, like I use like some of those, and they're mostly, it's hard to find, for example, like a dissected eyeball, because you kind of like, once you cut it, it's like it deflates, right? Like it has this, it's hard to keep like the shape of it, unless I guess, you have some kind of resin injected to it and then you cut it. But for the most part, you're going to find stuff like in books, it's like how much, refraction you have. It's like in terms of like how much it bulges out, it's going to be very relative. Like in some of those designs, it's like you're going to find like it popping out quite a lot like this. In some of them, it's much more like a, subtle. It's not so drastic. But yeah, so what I'm going to try to do here is to actually get something that makes sense. It's almost like I feel like this one could be smaller, and then if it is smaller, it starts to shrink like this distance right here. So I have to pop it out again. So I'm gonna have to bring it out again until like around the 12 in there, maybe a little bit less. So something like this, So if I have an eyeball like this now, which was a copy of this other high res in here, now I can actually copy, group both of them. So I can actually go to your mesh and then just say combine. And then I'm gonna delete my history here. So inside of it, now I have like the other one, like the old one, right? The one we just created, this new topology and everything. So a couple of things I can do now is to actually see like this edge around here is really close to that, right? So what I can do, I can actually create another loop in here. So I'm gonna create a loop. Let's see if I can find in the menu, because I have everything as shortcuts. At this point, I don't even remember how to, but I think it's like insert edge loop right here, right? So if you click that one, if you double click this one, you're gonna see the options. And it has an option here that's equal distance from edge. So if you click that one, now if you click this one here, it's gonna be always relative to that. So you're gonna keep like the roundness, see, like all the way. If I do with this one here relative, you're gonna change as I get closer to the square. Look, it becomes square and round, square, round. So I'm gonna use the equal distance, so that one keeps everything, oops, nice and round. So I'm gonna add an edge loop around here. And then maybe I can add another one around here. And then, yeah, obviously you could potentially shrink some of that stuff. Let me just hide everything here. So let's say if you have like this area here, I could potentially shrink. Oops. So get this one. I'm just select this, and make it a little bit smaller overall. So let's see, something like this. Then shrink a little bit more this area around here, something like that. And at this point, I'm not caring too much about the positioning there. I'm going to shrink this one here as well, because I'm going to rely on the the mesh that's underneath, right? So we can snap the whole thing. So I'm going to do this again. I'm going to just freeze my history. I'm going to click this guy and then click my other model, which should be the sphere, like sphere 10, this one. Let's see. Let's just select, just make sure it's the right one. Yeah, so it's sphere 2 and sphere 5. So this one, select the high res one first, and then I'm going to click this one here. It's going to be the low res. And then I'm going to do the same thing we did before, which is going to be mesh, transfer attributes. And we already have everything set, right? Just the vertex position, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to do this. Let's see, did it work? It didn't quite work, huh? Let me see if I have to pull that out in order for it to work. Let's see. Let's get this. Sometimes I think it has to be outside. Oh, nope. I think it has some history here. That's why. Yeah, with history, it actually really stops you from doing stuff. So let me just do this. Just gonna make like a rough version here, so we can actually snap back. So I popped it out like that. Let's just do this. So let's try again. Let's delete all history and click this guy, and then transfer. That should work now. So delete history again. Let's just hide this one. And now we have something that has that little, form in there. Now, what's going to happen as well is, because this is still not very, very high res overall, right? So we still might have some kind of elongation that's going to happen when you subdivide once more. It's an option for you guys to go and use this one as it is with the same resolution. So basically, like, we start with 8 by 8 and then subdivide once, right? So you probably have 16 sides right now. But at this point here, I would recommend actually to subdividing once more. And if we subdivide once more, probably going to shrink a tiny little bit more, right? And then you can adjust it, it's like you can do by hand if you want, but the change shouldn't be too drastic. But what's going to happen is, see, like, you already shrank in relation to that. So basically, like, you're going to have to scale up a little bit just to compensate for it. And this one probably the similar thing happens. So it should be fairly in the same spot. So now I have like the iris around here, and this one now it's like about 24, right? And now I have the eyeball geometry in there. So one thing that's important now, so let's say like you build the eyeball like this, right? Make sure you have a kind of like an easy transition between those spots, right? That's not something too harsh. It has to be like a very easy transition like that. And then for the UVs, right? So how I do the UVs for those guys, very important. Select all the faces and just do like a front projection. So go to UV, and then you can do like a planar, and you say Z-axis, right? In this case here. So I'm going to project it. So it creates a square like that. So now if I select the mesh, go to my window, general editors, and I go to my, actually modeling editor, UV editor. So I have something like this, right? Which is pretty much what we need, something that's right in the middle of the UV aisle. But at the same time, we need to cut it. So the best way to do it, normally like you're not going to see the back of the eye unless you really rotate the eye in a very weird way. That's not going to be the case for us. But for example, like you have the option, I'm going to cut it right in the middle. But in your case, if you feel like for whatever reason the eyeball is going to be rotated more than like, than expected, you can cut a little bit more towards the backing here. But to make things easier, I'm going to just double click this edge right here to select the middle. Go back to my UV editor, and I can just say cut into. I'm going to just say cut. And now here you can actually do this. You can just select the UV, double click anywhere here, right? And now I can move this stuff around. So you have like, this is the back of the eye here, right? So I'm going to do this. Actually I can do it in this one doesn't, I don't need to care too much. This is the one that's the important one, because this is the one that has the iris itself, right? So this is the front part. So the first thing you're going to do, you're going to have to actually unwrap this, because you see like some of the edges are not unwrapped in there. And we want to make sure that this is compatible with like the world scale, right? So you can go to modify, and then you can just say unfold. right? So it created like, oh, interesting. That's actually popping to a different spot. Let me try to do this without selecting the middle point. Let's try that. Use that one as a hook. Actually, better than this. I can actually select just the outer edge, convert to UV by pressing Control F12, and then I can just do like a shift and then make a window around it. So now basically like I'm just unfolding just the interior part, but the exterior part is going to be locked. So I can just do like a Control U. So now it's unwrapped, right? And everything is like preserved in the edges. Now that it's preserved in the edges, I'm going to shrink this just a little bit because you don't want this to touch the edge in there because of the problems with the UVs we might have. But the important part is it's completely right in the middle, right, of the UV eye over here. This is going to be very essential because we're going to be using like a circular map to be able to create a gradient in there. So it has to be right in the middle. Now, what should we do with this back part of the eye, right? Which is probably, we're not going to ever see it. You can, if you want to, you can actually press Control U as well. So it's basically like I'm going to do the same thing with the edge because just to be more perfectionist in there. This, and then just reverse it, something like that. Control U. Oh, actually it's flipped. That's why. So I have to unflip this thing. So modify, let's see, flip. Did it work? Let's see if it worked. Sometimes I think you have to do I think by face. Let's see if it worked. Let's see, like that. Control U. Kind of worked, kind of didn't, but anyway, let's do this. And then this little guy here, you can put it anywhere you want. I mean, I'm going to make very small like this so it doesn't use another space. And I can put right around here. Remember, this one is going to be the back of the eye. And then I really don't care about it. So that's basically what I do for the UVs for the eyeball itself, right? So at this point here, we are ready to actually start to assign some shaders. But we're going to do like that by using some of the eyeball from another scene, just to show you guys how I have the shader set. But let's go back to ZBrush for now and talk about the iris, right? Oh, another thing here. It's so basically like we built this one. Let's do stand eyes. Let's see this one. Which one is the one that I need actually here to show? I have a bunch of eyes in there. I don't even remember which one that is. Interesting. Let's just hide this stuff here all together. So this is the new stuff I just created. I'm gonna create a grouping here. I'm gonna just name it new. And then let me just unhide everything. So display show all. So everything is back. Let me just hide this one and let me hide again those top ones in here. So in terms of the other pieces necessary for the eye, right? We talked about like this outer part that we just built. And then we're gonna have, oh, I have another eye in there for some reason. There's no, oh, this is like the sphere, I can delete it. Okay. So inside of that eye that we just built, we have just the iris, and then we have this little disc in here, which is basically the pupil, right? The pupil is actually, it's a hole in there, right? That's why when you shine like a light, you're gonna get like the red eye effect in there because it's kind of gonna hit like the back of your eye because it's a hole. So you're gonna see like blood vessels and stuff in the back. You're gonna you get that kind of red eye. But in terms of if you're not trying to simulate like a red eye, the best thing is to just like create a very like very dark or black void, right? So I do that by creating a little lens, which is just a disc like this, right? It's just like you can copy the front of your iris, for example, just duplicate it and then just like move it back in here and assign a shader that has no specular or anything. It's just completely black. So that's the second piece in there. And then the third piece is the iris itself, right? Now for the iris, you see how heavy it is here, right? It has a ton of resolution. And why do I have like so much resolution? Well, it's because like some of those cavities are so tiny in there. And then unless you use like a vector displacement, which is always a pain in the butt to set up, it's different from each one of the different softwares. You have to run like a diagnostics kind of tool to be able to actually find out what Maya uses. I never bothered to do that. And so what I do, I just export like a high resolution out of ZBrush and then use that high resolution in here. This one has about 53,000 polys, which is not terrible. And then that way I don't need to be too concerned about like setting up other maps. I can assign the displacement map. And because now I have enough support in there, the displacement map should displace just the rest of the detail, with enough support. And it shouldn't shoot to like crazy directions or anything like that. So let's talk about the structure for the iris right now. And then later we're going to be talking about the whole breaking down all the shader network for it, right? But we have to talk about the structure and actually also the modeling part here. So the disk again is going to be, you can start with the same eyeball, just chop it, and then you can actually extrude like the center of it, make a little hole in there. It's a very simple geometry. You can use as a like a reference in here. Let's see if I can even, if I duplicate this, let me see if I can actually rebuild it. Let's see if it accepts it, so you can see even a simpler version. Reconstruct. Yeah, actually I was able to reconstruct it, so that's good. Let's try to go back in here. So basically, like, that's even simpler for you guys to see. That's basically what my geometry is, right? Easy to see visually. Let's turn off this coloring here, so you can see it like that. See, like, it's just a simple disk. The trick here is to make sure that this line right here, right at the edge, it has to be really close to that. Look at this one is a little bit smaller than I expect. I think like in Maya, I actually made it a little bigger. But you see like the gap between this area and this area, it's a little bit big right now. Sometimes you can get into trouble trying to do it and you get some intersections and then that's bad. So it's like the larger you can get like this disk without actually intersecting with the other part is the best. It's like really close to it would be ideal. But in terms of structure, again, very, very simple stuff, Yes.
You put a disk for the pupil in
Yes.
Maya.
Uh-huh.
Why don't you just use that tube that you have there?
This tube in here?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just like, it is a void, it's like that I could paint and remove, specular and all this stuff. But I mean, it's just another pass, it's like another thing to actually, deal with. So instead of like having to paint a different type of specular map or anything just to prevent any speck in the bottom of the eye, I just like covered it. It could be like a flat plane, for example, it would work just the same.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just like a simple way to just like not worry too much about changing shaders inside of it. I always have it's like if I'm doing something fast, like doing like a specular map for this, I actually don't even use a map. It's mostly like just the specular parameters in the shader. And then if I had something like this, I would have to, eliminate things from the specular map and just more work, I think. So yeah, it's basically like it's a little volcano. It's a very shallow volcano, right? Go up, then goes down 1 degree, 1 step, and then another step, and then the third step right there towards this little hole, right? So basically I started with that. And then when you get to the sculpture part of things, you can watch the time lapse, which is going to bring you to something more similar to, I would say, this one here probably. So at the end of the sculpt, you're going to have something similar to this. So based like that's based on that one. That was before I did all those extra changes. So if I subdivide once more here, that's kind of similar to what's in there, in that time lapse. And then before I went even crazier with the tiny little details. So if you have something like this with the correct color and the correct refraction on the eyeball, even this would work just fine. You have enough cavities in there to actually represent like to cast like nice shadows, and that should work just fine. But then in this case here, I decided to go even further and incorporate those tiny little structures in here, right? You guys feel free to do that or not. But it's kind of cool, It's like I thought it would be a cool eye because I already have the other type, which I can make more pores, and this one I would use more like for, probably like for lighter eyes or something. In terms of the sculpture itself, if I go back to this guy here, this is just a copy. And let's just do like a overall smooth here, just so you can see. So if I have something like this, so the tools that I use to start the sculpting, if you want to know, basically like I started with a very simple thing, which is like I can use my carve brush, right? The one we normally use to carve the wrinkles and everything. And then ZBrush, you have like under transform, you have the symmetry, and you have the symmetry radial. So I use like a radial symmetry of like, let's say 50 in here. And then you get like all those little guys, right? So you can actually start by sculpting something like this, just like to get some of those lines in place. You can actually reverse it. Just like to get like, obviously it's going to be completely symmetrical and also, but it's just like a little quick start, you know, for it. So I started with those guys. And then from that point, it's basically all clay buildup. So like I'm going to turn off my symmetry right here. And then you're going to see in the video in there, sometimes I would start like by carving certain references. So I would look at the reference in there and I'm going to try to identify, okay, I have some area here, going to have to carve, and then some other area here, right? I'm going to try to get like some of those spots from the reference itself, and to just like kind of like put them kind of like just for a reference of positioning, right? Just positioning. And then I would come with the clay buildup, you're going to see in there, and I would just like, a little strong in here, just going to start like to actually build the in-betweens, right? So I would kind of like start something like this, a little strong. Let's try 8, something like that. Would come with this, and I would look from the side like this, and I would look at those guys. It would look like little caves. So we just like dig a little cave in there, and then you start like going around, and then from here we'd start like blending with those little guys, and then driving this little cave a little bit further down, and then going to the next one. You know, it's like, so the next one probably like would be a little garage in here, right? Like for ants, ant garage, and then just like a little bigger. And then from time to time, I would get like to those little holes. So I would just like go around here, sculpt a little hole like this, smooth it out, make sure that's a little bit more elongated. So I can use like something like this, for example, to make a little bit more elongated. And then from time to time, I would even go here inside of it and just like draw little lines like that to break up like into 2 different cavities, just to have those little tendrils inside of it. So little by little, you know, it's like you're gonna see in the time lapse is much more self-explanatory, I would say. And then little by little, you can build all those structures. But obviously, like look at the best reference you can find is like the pictures, like those macro pictures, right? This that I sculpted is based on my interpretation, but if you do based on my own interpretation here, you might be missing an opportunity to actually, you know, study like the real eye and probably get something that's even more interesting than stuff I'm doing here, you know, like to sculpt your own eyes. But if you feel like copying it, I mean, I don't mind, it's fine. But so once we get like to this fine part here, then you're going to start actually blending those guys, you know, it's like kind of like coming with different lines, like in different diagonals, right? And then merging them in a different way to break up that initial kind of like symmetry that we had in there, right? And then from here, you're going to start actually some bifurcations here, right? Like I'm trying to, you know, it's like go and mix with the next bigger form. Always like the fractal thing that I always mention, right? Start small, go to big, big to small again. So like all this stuff can be blended. And then, yeah, so you start like that. For the color itself, I mean, like the color I painted is not even anything too fancy. It has, if I switch to this one right here, it has like some, it's kind of spotty, right? Like I use like the same techniques we used yesterday for the face. So basically like some very, very broad noise. And then I got like some very desaturated colors. If I sample this one here, you're gonna see right there, it's like, it's very, very desaturated, right? It's not something like this yellow, always like more towards this. Even like for blue eyes and green eyes, I never use something like this. That's the impression we have. Oh, it's gonna look cool, right? Put the blue like that. And it looks like a doll. It never looks correct. But if you wanna make it correct, then you go almost completely all the way to gray. It's like, it's a very minor little color you put. And then once you render this, for some reason, it makes it pop like as a more realistic result, you know. And then if you have this as a base for the whole thing, like a very desaturated blue or green, then you can come with some very few specific spots and add some more saturated parts, for example, like little browns here and there. But the main color itself has to be very desaturated, right? So again, like other than the cavity map that we painted in here, which I baked the way I showed you guys before. So I baked the cavity first, and then reversed that mask, and then I went with kind of like a spray brush in there, but very simple, as you can tell, right? Like one thing I did here, I actually painted a little bit more of this edge around here, just to be more recognizable. So I painted around there, and then other than that, it's very, very simple, you know. The same way we did yesterday with the skin color, we're going to be using something like this, but then inside of Maya, we can plug any maps you want, and then we can tweak this whole color, you know, it's like and get things to look much different than this. So this is basically like the iris itself. Now for the cornea we have to sculpt like the fine detail, right? So the cornea we brought here was basically like the one from Maya, right? I'm gonna bring to ZBrush in here, and then I'm gonna start just like with let's duplicate this one so we don't lose it. We're gonna start just like we did with the face, right? So we're gonna get like a color that's kind of like an average color, probably more towards the back in here. This case here I'm using, it's a little saturated. I would go more desaturated next time I paint, but just for a reference, it's like 147, 104, and 100. And then once you have that in place, then you can actually color the whole thing. Start with a solid color, something like that, right? And then let's go back to my topology here. And then with the topology, you can actually select by topology, a mask. Let's do actually, let me delete all the higher detail in here so we can actually start fresh. So let's just delete the higher resolution stuff. Let's delete higher here. So let's subdivide once, twice, 3 times for now, 4 times, something like that. And then let's just go back here again, and let's select by topology. So something like this. Basically, like if you click move, scale, or rotate, you're gonna get this little gizmo in there, and you can just click control and just click and drag. You're gonna select by topology. And then once I have something like that, I can actually just get out of it, press T. And then if you click control and then click inside of the mask, you can actually smooth it out, right? And fade things a little bit more. So around here, I can actually paint everything white. So instead of like going full white, you can do like a little bit of gray to it, maybe a tiny bit of yellow, maybe something like this, almost completely gray and yellow, like very, very, almost like white. So I'm gonna go up in resolution a little bit, and I'm gonna just go and color and then fill object again. So now we have something like this, right, as a starting point. I can actually even keep this mask like this, just reverse it. And then, so basically like it's masked around there, but then I can actually press Control H to hide the mask. And at this point, we're only gonna color this area outside in here. And then from this point on here, I was just using the color spray, right? Same deal, just do like no color variation, maybe like the flow much, much lower or 0. And then same deal, you know, it's like get the color that's gonna be, for example, like a very pale yellow, something like that. And I can go around here, it's a little strong. Let's try low intensity, like 5 or 6. So just like slowly you start covering those areas with a very broad kind of, you know, noise. And then you can go a little bit further and then use like even a bigger noise around here for those areas. So just to add some of that depth that I mentioned yesterday, more so in the middle area. If you look at references of eyeballs, I mean, like you're gonna find sometimes close to the veins, you're gonna get some kind of like oranges and slightly yellows. So you can actually introduce some of that in here by doing something like this, like more saturated. So just around like here, for example, just add some more of that, a little bit more saturation. And then basically like for everything that's like the most like bloody parts, like the veins outside, you can actually saturate things a little bit further and you start painting, for example, like this outside here. I'm gonna go even more saturated, something like this. Let's try something like that. And really go to town, for example, painting like this. Has to be the area that's gonna be almost completely hidden. You can, to the point that you're only gonna see like little hints of this redness right around the edges, you know, it's like right against the eyelids themselves. If you're seeing too much red around this area here, it's going to look weird. But if you see just little glimpses of it, it helps like integrating, you know, it's like with the rest of the eye, because you're going to get some tones in there are going to be a little bit darker. So you can do something like that, you know, it's like always with a lot of spray, right? Now, for the fun part is actually the veins, right? The fun part is always the veins in there. So I'm going to go to the highest resolution I have. Let's subdivide once more. Let's try. I cannot subdivide because I have the selection now, but let's do this. This select, I'm going to subdivide it to 1 million. Let's see, like 4 million, 4.5 million, something like that. And then we're going to switch to that brush that I showed you guys yesterday, which was the veins, right? The little lightning like that. So for the lightning, you can start by actually cheating as well. So you're going to use like a transform. Again, like you can do like a radial symmetry, and I can use like a small radial count, like maybe 8. And then the trick here is to actually sculpt and paint at the same time. So basically, like I'm using an intensity of 7 for it. And then the RGB intensity at 100. But the color probably going to be very saturated right now. It's not too bad, actually. Let me try to get a little bit darker, maybe something like that. So you can start with the major ones, like the big ones, like the ones that are going to go all the way to your brain there, right? Like the big veins in there. And then you can start actually just incorporating. Oh, I did a little bit too close to the other one. Incorporating a little bit of a rotation. So at least you have like a little bit more of a variation in there. Just to get those ones, again, they're not going to be very visible. They should be like barely visible in there. So you can actually do this with this little cheat, right? But then you can sculpt stuff by hand as well. Like nothing stops you from doing that. You can actually from time to time crank the saturation and the color a little bit towards a little bit more variation. So you get a little bit more kind of like magenta in there. And then, so we're going to get like this whole area around kind of like all the major blood vessels. And then at that point, you can actually turn off your symmetry, and then you start doing like the more specific stuff. So you can start with try not to get too close to the corner, right? But you can start with something like this. From time to time, you're gonna do you're gonna blur some of them. So for example, like I can do this one here, and I can do a blur both like color and also the detail. Maybe too much here. Let's see, 2020, something like that. Because remember, like anytime you have something that's a little bit more blurry, it looks like it's deeper into the tissue, right? So basically, if you have something that's very sharp and strong colored, it's gonna look like something that's right against the surface. So this is kind of like, it's just like to cover a lot of area with those veins, you know, it's like you can do a lot of work with them. But from time to time, you're gonna notice that there is no way to get like some very precise kind of like specific veins you get like from the references. In that case, you're gonna have to sculpt by hand. So you're gonna do the same thing. I mean, like pick like a small intensity in there, because you're gonna have to sculpt and paint at the same time. And then you can come with something like, you know, it's like go with a little vein like that, start like fading with the pressure of your mouse. And you can pick like another one here, kind of like same deal, you know, it's like from time to time it's worth doing some of those, you know, instead of like always having the same kind of structure. And then from, you know, again, like you can do a little bit of a blur just to make sure that this reads like it's a little bit deeper in the tissue, you know. So, you know, that kind of stuff really helps. And then when you get closer to this area here around the iris itself, this is going to be completely transparent at the end of the day. Then you can actually get a little bit more pale white yellow to be represented around, let's see, around this area. So let's go a little bit stronger with my RGB. So we see like a little bit more brighter around here. At the same time, what I'm doing here, like it's not like I think like my spray is a little bit too strong. I can start with a very low intensity and just like slowly blend those things. But the cool thing that's gonna happen is when you start actually mixing tiny little veins with those, you know, it's like inside of like this whitish area here. Imagine that everything you're gonna see here is gonna be mostly this white area, and this area here where you see the veins is gonna be barely visible. So, you know, it's like the further you can go with this lighter color, the better. But just remember that you need to preserve a little bit of that halo that's a little bit more red around the edges, because you want to make sure that that's going to be blending with the eyelids at the end when you do the renders, you know. But for the most part, let's see, like just get the other one so we can compare. It's like a much more advanced version of it, right? But same principle. You see, like there's some like hand sculpted ones in here. They're a little bit strong. I could potentially just like smooth them out a little bit. Oh, what did I do? I think I did some. Okay, there you go. So something like blend them a little bit like that, you know, so they look a little bit deeper. So, but there's a lot of like crossed versions of those, right? Like they're kind of like, so this guys here, definitely I would have to, you know, it's like to blend some more of them like that. And, but I mean, like if you look at references, you can find some of them are much more saturated. There's some other artifacts in there, you know, but the important thing is like, try not to touch this area here, right? The lens itself, because physically, right, you would see everything distorted if you had any deformation happening right there. So you kind of like always aim a little bit closer to it. Almost like kind of like the spermatozoids going towards the egg in here, right? It's kind of just the chase. And then you see like around here, for example, my reds are already too close to the R's. So when I render this stuff, it normally looks a little bit weird, you know? So that's why I'm gonna have to counter a lot of this like in Maya by using like some masks and stuff. But if you wanna do it correctly, I would suggest you guys to go more towards, you know, it's like getting a little bit wider. So let's turn off here so you can see. So getting a little bit more white around this area and kind of like eliminating some of those veins. And then from time to time, you can actually repaint one or two of them, kind of like invading that area in there. But I would say like for the most part, keep like a good halo around it. And then just use the very edges in here as something that you're going to be kind of visible in the very corners of the eyes, right? So in terms of technique, that's basically it. You know, it's like it's a matter of like you doing this in a much more careful way than what I did in here, right? And then you can get like much better results. A lot of stuff here is kind of like, even though I'm showing you guys here, I mean, like I kind of hacked it as well, and it's not that great looking, and it still works for my renders, you know. But everything that I do in those classes have plenty of room for improvement. You know, it's like this stuff, it's the kind of stuff I have to repaint at some point and make it much nicer. But the fact that it's working already, even though it's pretty hacky, you know, it's like, it just shows that you guys have plenty of room to improve in there as well, you know, so just like with those ideas in mind, obviously. So that kind of covers the eye itself. And then this is the way that I used to do the caruncula. You know, it's like this is not even the latest one. That's weird that I have the old one in here. I think this guy has the new ones. Let's see. I think this one has the new paint. Yeah, this one has a much nicer paint in there. So the same deal. I mean, like for the carunculus, I used to do this way. I would have like a mesh like this. Let me turn off the... I have poly paint. I don't have poly paint. It's probably like a map. That's weird that I have a map in here. Texture map. Yeah, weird. Wasn't supposed to have a map in there. Okay, so let's go back in here and then turn off this and then turn the fill off. So basically the surface for the caruncula, now I'm actually building within the mesh, right? Like I show you guys. But this is an option you guys have as well to build something like this. It's a very simple mesh. You can start with a plane. So basically like you can do like almost like this triangular shape like that. And then you extrude this plane so you have some volume to it. And then when you get to this area, you make much more bulgy, right? So we can actually cover that little gap in there. But in terms of geometry itself is a very, very simple geometry, as you can tell. The trick here is always like to get really close to the eyeball. So in this case here, if you look at both the eyeball and the iris together, and the caruncula together, see there's a tiny little gap in there, almost nothing. Ideally, you would have like a barely any gap in between them. You would have to get like, if you get the move topological in here, you would have something like this, you know, it's like much closer to the surface. And then the idea in here is to actually create a transparency map that's going to blend, because you see like the caruncula itself, like in the real eyeball, is going to end around here. And in my case, I have it going all the way and touching the iris itself, which is kind of like a weird kind of thing to look at, right? Like it doesn't look correct. But the thing is, like, if I use like a blend here, so for example, like a gradient map, I can blend this all the way into that. And then if I have anything, for example, like micro veins and things like that painted into this model like I have right now, all of this becomes kind of like a secondary layer of veins that's going to blend with the lower one until you get completely transparent. So at the end of the day, you get like a very nice blend that doesn't look at all like two different pieces. It looks like a single piece. It looks like this. Let's try to render something here just to show you guys. So for example, if I get like any of those eyeballs, let's get this, and then let's just delete this sphere that I had in there. So if I get like, let's say this one and this one and this one, and let's just get this whole thing here and then plus the background. And just like unhide, just keep this one visible. So you're gonna see this. Let's see what's my render here. A lot of stuff open. Not that one. This one, yes. So this one has like funky colors and everything, but at least to see it, gonna be a good exercise. So if I do something like this, it's gonna take a little bit to calculate in there, but it's coming. So right now, if I just isolate this area around here, oh, let me see. I think I have my progressive off, so on now. It should be faster. So you see, like it blends almost like you cannot tell the difference. You know, it's like there is no seam because everything is done with a map that's blending everything together. So that's basically like the way I used to do it. It works fine. You know, it's like the only thing I didn't like was that if this has any intersection with eyelids, you start getting some glows around those areas in the edges. If you're very careful about not having those penetrations there, you should be fine doing this way, you know. So in terms of geometry, again, like if I look at this, it's a very simple concept, right? It kind of curves with the eyeball and then comes out again right against that little edge. So it has this shape, right? And in this case here, it's not even that perfect, right? The one I have in ZBrush right now, it looks more perfect than that. Like the curvature follows more perfectly. Now the trick in here is to actually use the correct UV for it. So either you paint a black and white map that you can use for the blend, or you can use a gradient. But if you're using a gradient, you're gonna have to make sure that the UVs are completely vertical. In this case here is not, you know, it's not perfect. The newest model that I built actually has all those lines completely vertical, horizontal. So if I apply like a vertical gradient in here, it does a perfect job, you know. But in this case here, it still does a decent job, right? It's actually working in there. If you look at the renders, it's actually not too bad. But yeah, it's not like a perfect gradient in there. So we're going to explore some of that. Let's talk about shaders because that's going to be the important part in here. Let me just save this file because I think the latest stuff I did had a better shader network. So let me just save this one. All eyes. Okay, save this one like this. And let's open this shot right here. It's basically the same thing. It's just, I think the shaders have a better look. Let's see, projects is like this base mesh that I'm working on for a little bit, but it's not done at all. But I think it has a better shader network for you guys. Actually, I'm gonna have to go back to this one to talk about the caruncular shader later because that's not part of the new model. But it's okay, we can go back and forth. Just a second, just opening there. Let's see if I have anything I've forgotten here. It should be it, I think. Yeah, this is the old caruncular there. Yeah. Okay, so let's go back to this guy here. So I have like this model. Oops, did I press the wrong thing? That has some of the stuff. It's kind of like a base mesh I'm working on right now. Let's see. It's just a bust. Use the same topology and everything as the latest model. So it looks like that. And then it just has a very simple, you know, stuff. But the cool thing is that everything fits very perfectly. That's the whole care that I had in here about making sure that if I just show you this, for example, if I subdivide both of them, you're gonna see like this line around here in relation to the eyeball. I can even go like inside of the eyeball. Let's see. Let's turn on lighting two-sided. So I have my pocket in there. Like this is the eye itself, right? But you see like this is the pocket of the eyeball. And then I have like, it still has a tiny bit of intersection in there, but look how it looks like from the inside. So basically like this is the topology for the face itself, right? It has this perfect pocket right here. It goes all the way around and conforms to the eyeball itself. So like if you look at them like in you know, wireframe, there's a tiny bit of offset in there. So basically like there's no penetration between the two. And that was my intention, you know, it's like, and even if you look without the eyeball, if you look at the cavity itself, look at how good it is right here, for example, like it's like chamfered in there to accommodate the eyeball perfectly inside. So basically like you look both sides, see like this is all to prevent like any intersection, you know, it's like, so it has like a very perfect, even here I compensated for it. So you see like there's the little bulge for the cornea right here. It's actually built into the topology. Obviously, it's something that if we move the eye side to side and everything, I'm gonna have to adjust that, right? But yeah, so that's kind of like the stuff I was paying attention when I was building this guy. But let's talk about those shaders in here. So the face, are gonna hide it for now. Actually, let me get the HDR right. There you go. So let me get the XGen hidden as well. This one, and then hide this one. Let's render this one. I think the R's might need a little work here and there, but it should be good for the most part. Let's just make sure that it works. So let's save this one as a reference and then render that. Just calculating some stuff. Go on.
Excuse me, Chris.
Yes.
When you built the eye socket and well, that whole mesh, and then to make sure they don't intersect, was that all done in Maya? And did you use some sort of like that vertex conforming type of methods, or?
Yep, exactly. So I started with a copy of the eyeball itself as a starting point, and then I blended with my topology what I had in there before, and then I used the transfer thing to just like make a perfect match, and then I shrunk the eyeball just a tiny bit using the center as a reference.
Okay.
Oh, there you go. Kind of like starting to render here. So yeah, the color, I think like the edge in here looks a little bit too strong. But you know, it's like we can either like use this one or use the other one. It doesn't matter to me. Like in terms of the principle is going to be the same. Just the adjustments. You know, I don't like to see it like this halo too dark like that. So I can even show you guys how I can actually fix this right now. So let's look at the shader networking here. So for let's start with the simple stuff first. Oops. Let me get let's see. I think like one is it's all grouped in here. So let's try to ungroup this stuff. Let's do this, and this, Shift P. So they're all ungrouped now. So let's start with hiding the eyeball. So let's start with the simplest part of the whole thing. So basically like the little disc, right? So basically like this, the pupil in there. So for the pupil, let's see if I look at the graph in here, the material looks like this. It's basically like everything is based on the AI standard surface, right? So it's Arnold. But you see like my base is black with the weight at 0, specular 0, subsurface 0, coat 0, everything is 0, right? So basically like that's just to create a little void. So that's the simplest part of it. Now for the iris is another thing that when you do the UVs for the iris, I forgot to mention this, make sure that you go, let's see if it's gonna show correctly here because it's a little bit heavy and sometimes Maya chokes when it's heavy. It's fine. So the main concern here is that it's centered right in the middle of the aisle, right? In this case here, it's a little bit smaller than the aisle itself, like the UDIM, but it's perfectly in the center, right? So you're gonna need that for the same reason. If you want to use some maps, let's say like for to tweak like some colors and stuff, you're gonna need to use like some circular maps, gradient maps. So make sure that this is like right in the middle, and make sure that it's actually unwrapped as well. So when I unwrapped, so this is the interior of that little hole in there. That's all unwrapped in here for me, right? So make sure that you have those two elements, like front projection and then completely unwrapped and completely centralized with UV, right? UV space. We're gonna talk about that little tier line as well. So let's go back to this guy here. Let's look at the properties here for the shaders. So if I just do a quick render here again without the eyeball itself, let's see if it does. If it does render here, let's see what the colors are. It's going to be quite boring, like from the get-go. Like it's not going to have anything too interesting. Come on, Maya. Let me double check here if my resolution is a little bit high. Might be. Let's try. Yeah, it's a little high. So let's try 900 by 900, something like that. And actually, my settings for the render as well. Let's see. No, those are good. 8, 1, 2, 3, 4. That's good. That should work. Okay, so let's just do a quick render here. So you should reload those things and doesn't have to calculate the displacement for the eyeball itself now. Let's see. It's going to look very weird. It doesn't have any depth because that's just the iris itself. So it should look quite flat. Maya's taking sweet time to calculate that. I have to check actually the number of subdivisions that I have for the iris. It might be a little bit too high, you know, and that can, yeah, let me check this right now actually, because otherwise it's going to be torture you. Because you see, like the resolution is quite high right here. In this case here, I brought like, for whatever reason, I brought like the 800,000 polys for it. That's not right. I think I was tripping when I did it. So in that case, let's see how many times I'm subdividing. 3 times. I don't need that. I probably like 2 times should be fine. Let's try that. And then instead of like 800,000, let's re-export that as a lower res. I'm going to show you how to export this. So let's say you sculpted your iris in there, and now we have like to export this whole thing. You saw that I actually did this whole thing in HD geometry, right? You don't need to. You can do like without the HD. But at the same time, you see like 852, 860, 481. I mean, like this is the full resolution before HD, which is weird. Because I don't think I have all this detail when I look in Maya. So look right there. I don't know. Looks a little bit too much, right? So basically, that's what I have happening here in Maya. So that's kind of looks nice. Looks pretty similar to what I have in here with the color, right? If I do like a skin shader like that. So to export this, so my main concern is to actually get most of those little cavities as a kind of like a good solid base for the displacements to work in here, right? So instead of like using vector displacement, so I can go like 1, 2 subdivision level higher. Before we do this, let's do that that whole thing that we did before. Let's see if we have like 2, 3 subdivision levels. So now I have like most of those little caves visible. So at 3 subdivision levels should be good to go. So what we're going to do, we're going to do this. We're going to export this one as, let's try personal Velasquez, ZBrush, OBJ. So we're going to do like a iris mid resolution 1. I'm going to go to the lowest level now. I'm going to go export iris lower resolution 1. So 1 is just like to do the switch morph target, which is going to be the lower, and the mid resolution is going to be the one we're going to be bringing to Maya for rendering. So I'm going to export this one, and then now I'm going to just delete my morph target. Same deal. Store, switch, import the low resolution, not the middle. And now we can export the displacement map for this guy. Let me just save my project in here. But before I do this, I'm going to just delete this entire guy here because I have all those subtools. It's going to delete this entire thing. Go back to this one. I just need to work on this file. And I'm just going to save this one as eyeball. Eyeball 1 should be fine. So just like, so we have that saved. Because you remember, like before exporting anything, right? Like maps is always good to have it. And then this one should have the colors too. So let's do both at the same time. Let's do like a plugin, multi-map exporter, displacement, and the texture from PolyPaint, right? And then the trick here is going to be, I don't need like a 8K map. I can use a 4K. So the trick here is going to be first the switch morph target. And then second here is going to be the subdivision level, right? Remember, like when I was exporting the mesh, I exported it out of the third subdivision level, the one we're going to be using in Maya, right? So here I have to actually use a displacement map that starts from that level and then subdivides everything from that and on, right? So I have to match the subdivision level I'm exporting. So instead of 0, I'm using 3 here. So it's not going to match this mesh, but it's going to match the mesh that we just exported outside. So let's do this. Let's just create all maps. And that's going to be plugged into the source images in here. So eyeball. So it's going to calculate. It's just like one single displacement map, like 4K, right? And because it's HD, is going to be super fast. Look at how fast it's exporting the HD. If I had the same amount of details, which is like what, like 20 million polygons or something like that, outside of HD, that would take like many, many minutes, you know? So basically in 26 seconds, I exported both the HD displacement map and also the color. So let's test those guys in here. And then that way we should get faster renders too. So let's just, now the question is like, is this probably not gonna come to the right spot? But let's pretend you guys are doing this from scratch anyway. So I'm gonna do import. And then we're gonna get your ZBrush OBJ. So I have the iris mid resolution, not the low. So I'm gonna get that guy. It should pop down there somewhere. Yeah, right there in the center. Now to set up like how we're gonna render it, this is like 53,000 polygons instead of 800,000, right? To set up how you're gonna render it, remember to go to your attributes. For anything you bring to Maya from ZBrush, you have to set this up at least once, right? And then if you use morph targets or blend shapes later, you can actually keep them. But if it's the beginning of a new mesh, you're gonna do a subdivision here. You can use Catmull Clark. You're gonna start with 3 subdivisions. Raster are gonna switch to object. Pin corners are gonna keep linear. And then for the displacement attributes, everything is default. Auto bump, definitely gonna use auto bump. And then later we can actually choose if you're going to do something else with it. So that's basically like for the displacement, that's what we need. And now we need a new material for it, right? So I can actually either go to my hypershade, or you can just like right click the object and you can say like assign new material. You can go to Arnold shader and then standard surface, right? So now it has a standard surface in there. And then we can actually plug a displacement map. So we're going to go like standard surface. I can name this one Iris Velasquez. Oops. Forgot one letter. And then click this little arrow to go to the displacement tab. I'm going to click the little checker and assign displacement in here. So let's get eyeball displacement map, right? This one doesn't have any UDIMs because it's just a single map. So it's just like you don't need to do anything about it. You don't need to do this. I always do, but the auto generate textures in here, you don't need to do it. And because it's not going to render anyway, like if you go to the properties in here, if you have the textures set to auto convert and use existing TX textures off, you shouldn't consider anyway. But so at this point here, we should get this object to render with the displacement, but let's do a quick test. So the next thing I'm gonna do, you see, like, I don't need to do this because Maya does on the fly when you subdivides for rendering. But if you see something that's all faceted and you don't like to see that, you can just click the object, go to your let's see, mesh display, and then you can say soft edge, right? So that's soften things for you. It's not going to change in the render, but just to have something nicer. And then let's try to render this one. It's going to be like a brand new render. And then just, you should bring just the displacement part. There's no texture assigned just yet. Let's see how it looks. Why so slow, Maya? Let's see, is it rendering correct? Progressive render, yeah. Weird, huh? Weird that's so slow in there. Let's try a little window like that. Sometimes it helps. Maya is still thinking about something. That's so weird. It shouldn't be this slow. Oh, there you go. All right, so we're getting the detail in there. So that means the displacement is working, right? So that's good. You see, like, I have specular in there. That's why I normally use that disk, so I don't need to cover that stuff. But so the displacement is working there. So let's assign that color that we just sent to here. And for the shader itself, it's going to be pretty much like a plain shader without a lot of subsurface scattering. So if I just go like right here, I can plug like the color map straight to this channel in here. But one thing that we can actually check, it's just to show you guys like how I start the shaders and everything. But if we look at how this one is set, let's see if I have any fancy maps here. For the base, I think I'm using mostly subsurface scattering, but I'm actually using scale at 0, which makes no sense. So I think what I did here is that I was playing with some of those values, mixing the base with the subsurface scattering. And at the end, I just decided to basically like remove the subsurface scattering completely, which basically that's what it happens when you have a scale at 0 in here, right? So it doesn't quite matter in there. But I have like the subsurface color assigned to this channel here. In the case of the other one that we just brought in, what we can do, let's just copy this tab so we can use as a reference later. And let's go to this guy here. And since we start with this one fresh, so let's assign this to, it's like, let's get the color map plugged in both the base and also for the subsurface scattering. So the subsurface is going to crank it, let's say like to 600 for now. So that means that it's not full-on subsurface, it's actually mixing with whatever is coming from here. And then I'm just going to plug this color map around here. So in the color of the diffuse, I'm going to get same deal. Like, actually, this one I can actually use quadratic. And then eyeball. So I'm going to plug this one first. Right, same deal. Turn that off if you need. And then if I want to just create a copy of it, actually use the same map assigned to both channels, you can do something like this. If you bring your hypershade up, and you can basically like you can expand like this. You click the shader network for the iris. You can do like a graph input and output connections. And now you see this is the one is plugged to the base color, right? So what you can do, you can actually just click and drag this one into the subsurface color. And that way you use basically the same map for both of them. But sometimes what I like to do is to actually keep independent. So instead of doing that, I click this one and I press a Control-D to create a copy. And then I have that copy plugged in there, So we can try both ways. I guess I'm going to do like separate for now. So you have control over both. So let's see how this renders right now. I mean, like it still has a specular, going to look funky and all that stuff. But at least we can see what's going on with the render. So right now it's rendering like it doesn't have a lot of interesting thing going on. Let's try to expand this. Right, it has a lot of specular in here, so it's capturing a lot of this whiteness and stuff like around. So what I normally do with the specular for the iris itself is to keep things very broad, right? So let's copy what we did in here. So in terms of specular, you see like I use like very little, so 0.2 or 0.193 in this case. If you want to copy this color to here, all you have to do is just click it. And then when you click any color, that's stored as the last one in there. So if I go here now, it should be waiting for me right there. So that's basically the same color. And then here, instead of 300, I'm using 300, sorry. And then let's see for the transmission. Transmission, I don't have anything. So that's going to be what, like a subsurface. The subsurface, let's copy that stuff. So I have my map assigned in there, and the radius in here are going to copy the same color to this one here. Oops. Right there. And then I have a lot of subsurface scattering, so I'm going to remove it all the way. That's what's causing that weirdness in there. But obviously, if you want to create a little bit of a scale, you can always use a little bit of subsurface scattering, you know. But I normally see more of the detail when I don't have it. Let's try with a tiny little bit of it, like maybe 0.01 like that. Just get a little bit softer. It's important that it actually doesn't look too soft when you look from a close-up. Sometimes it looks a little bit weird. So now I have like 0.010, 600. That means like if I had all the way here, it would be completely subsurface scattering. If I go all the way down, that's completely ignored. And now all the information is coming from this channel in here, which basically like you can remove it completely or crank the weight in here, right? So there are a bunch of things we can do in terms of color correcting this whole thing here, right? Let's say you have an idea about, okay, I brought this iris in here, but I want to shift this color towards like some other color. You can always use like, instead of like plugging this subsurface color here, you can always use the color corrective node that we plugged yesterday in between, right? But let's say you want to create like some kind of like a gradient in a way that, for example, like the center, you want a different color than the rest of it. So let's say you go, for example, like to the subsurface coloring here, right? You can plug this anywhere actually, but this is a good spot right here. So imagine this. If I go to the color itself for the subsurface, if I expand this tab here, that's basically like the color grain is at white 1. So if I bring this all the way down here, it's going to get darker and darker, right? So let's say if you want to shift this color towards some other weird color, something like alien here, like that, right? So you can actually use this to colorize things. So using this principle, you can, instead of like using a plain color, you can use like a Maya node here, for example. You can click that little guy. And you can say, you know what? I want to use a ramp. So you click ramp in there. And then the ramp, you say like, you know what? I want a ramp which is actually circular, like that. And then I'm going to go here, for example, and I'm going to pick like the weird color for this area. And then around here, I want to use, let's say like green, something like that. And then you can play with it, you know, it's like, so this way you can actually, obviously I'm just doing a complete exaggeration here, but imagine like if you want to, just a little tint of blue or, you know, it's like a different color in here. And just a little bit of, you know, I want to add a little bit of kind of like a reddish, brownish right in the middle. So if I add something like this, see, like I got a little bit more brownish right there in the middle. But then here I can actually use a little bit of bluish green, but very saturated, something like that, like even more blue. So that way you can actually create like variations on the fly in here, you know, it's like just by poking around with those slides. And I mean, like this kind of stuff you can use, like I said, like in multiple different parts. In this case here, what I did, I actually went to the subsurface color, which was just the map itself, right? That was plugged. And then under the properties of the map itself down here under color balance, instead of using white for the color gain, I'm actually using a circular gradient from Maya with some funny colors just to get some of that type of effect that I want in there, you know. This is basically like for the color gain itself, but you have also a color offset in here. So for the color offset goes from black all the way to white, so it's going to wash out everything like that. So it washes out. So you can actually use those two combined. And this one also accepts like a gradient. So you can actually plug a gradient that starts, let's say, like black in the edges in there and just washes out like in the middle, for example. You can do all kinds of different combinations in here. I'm going to keep a little bit kind of washed out just slightly like that, right?
Chris,
Yes.
once you do all this VizDev here, when it goes into the eye socket, do you have to redo everything?
When you do what part, what?
You're doing all this VizDev right now on the eyes and the color and whatnot.
Yeah.
When it goes into the socket, are you going to have to adjust all that?
Quite possibly, yeah. The good part is that we're going to have all those nodes already in there waiting for us. But Yeah, definitely. Like when you see that against the skin, you know, it's like you get like, oh, you know what? It looks too saturated. It's not kind of like not part of the same family, you know. So you end up like adjusting things for sure. But kind of like here is just like a fun exercise, just showing how things are assembled. But definitely like there is this thing about rendering at everything at the same time to see how they talk to each other, you know.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and then there's another thing that's important to talk about here, which is, so the specular, let's see if I'm using any code in here. Actually, I'm not. So it's just basically like a rough specular that I'm using, like a 300, right? Uh, Basically, like one thing that it's interesting to observe is that when you see underwater footage, right? It's not like a like you're seeing a lot of specular underwater. It's almost like the water itself is conducting that, and you're gonna see lots of caustics effects and everything, right? But if you're working the production, normally what they do, they eliminate most of the specular from the objects that are underwater, right? So the fact that I'm using a little bit of specular in here is not like to actually make this shine too much. You see, like it's a broad kind of spec with a low intensity. It's more likely to help me to simulate the caustic effect, you know, because I want like if the light is coming from, let's say, like the left and hitting this area here, I want to make sure that it catches a little bit of that, you know, reflection to help me with the caustic effect. But remember that the caustic effect is only going to happen correctly when you have like obviously a transparent object around it, but you have to have a light that can be visible. That means like any HDRI light gonna work for that, or any mesh light, basically like you create a plane, convert the plane, right, like to mesh light right here. But the area light itself doesn't have that. The area lights, you don't have like a visibility switch in there. So between an area light and a mesh light that was basically created using a plane, I would trust the mesh light better to create like the correct, you know, type of caustics that we expect in the eyeball. So that's basically like the shader network for the iris. Like very simple, as you can tell. You can experiment with it. You know, it's like maybe like I said, like increase a little bit of the subsurface scattering or reduce it. You know, depending on how it looks like. But you have to see with the sclera on top of it first. So what we're gonna do now, we're gonna just unhide the eyeball here. So it's starting to calculate in there. No, not so much. Let's see. Did I unhide it? Did not unhide anything. Oh, it's actually, obviously, I'm actually using this one here, but the eyeball is over there. Duh. So what we're going to do, just going to hide this one. And I'm going to replace that old iris with this one. I'm going to do like a approximate, like really close to it. I don't know. Let's see. Let's just center it. It's funny that when I try to center things here, Maya is actually popping all the way to the other side. Probably something in the settings in there. So the thing that I'm going to have to pay attention here is that from the top, I have to match it quite perfectly in there. So I'm just going to go here and I'm going to rotate it. In your case, I mean, like if you're bringing this into your scene, obviously you're going to be basically like parenting both the eyeball and the iris and everything, and then doing that overall rotation, which is like about like 3 degrees, right? So that's not quite what I'm doing here. What I'm doing is that I already had an iris and I'm just replacing with the new one to kind of like start from scratch so you guys can see what I was doing in there. That's the whole difference. Holy shit. It's getting so heavy, man. I think it's that old iris. I'm so glad I brought this new one. So I'm going to just keep it in here and delete that old one. 800,000 polys, man. That's amazing. So now I have it in place again. So now I can actually unhide the eye. And let's see if there's any intersection we can correct. If you make this wireframe, we can actually see what's going on in there. So basically, you see, like it's almost touching that little area in there. It could be a little bit bigger. So let's just center it. And then let's make as big as possible without intersecting with it. See, there's an intersection happening there, but when I get closer, it doesn't show. It's because of the far clip plane that I have and the near clip plane. So Maya works with every software actually has this near and far clip plane. So the way it works is like this. If you click View, select Camera, you're going to see right here in the properties of the camera, It has like near clip plane like 0.1, and then the far clip around that. So for example, like if I just put 1 here, for example, now I'm not going to see that intersection anymore. Right? So if I click this guy here, now the intersection is gone. At the same time, it's going to start disappearing when I get too close to the object, right? But at least like at this point here, let me just like grow it. And then until I don't see anything. So it's a little bit out off center too. I'm going to bring more to the side right here. And obviously it would be nicer if you can do this more precisely than what I'm doing here. But I'm going to try to do like a, just like compensate to get kind of like right to the middle. And then I can bring it back like that. And probably like around here. So something until it doesn't intersect anymore, you know. It has to be really close, as you can tell right here, right? Close to that little edge right there. It's a little gap, but it's not bad at all. So that's good. So let's look now. Oh, what did I press? Oh, I pressed 6 by mistake. So let's get to this guy. Yeah, I keep opening those windows, and I don't know which is which there. So let's just hide this. Let's do a quick render to see with the shader, and then let's talk about the shader. Let's break it down. So you see, like I'm getting this weird line in there. That's like the blend is not working very correctly just yet, but we got like at least the reflections are in place. So let's look at how this is assembled here, right? We didn't talk about any transparency at this point, so let's talk about transparency for this guy here. So window, modeling, UV editor, centered, right? That's what we need to know. The back of the eye in the corner, like I did before for you guys to see. So let's take a look at the shader networking here. So for the shader network, what I have like a subsurface at 1. So again, ignore the base in here. We are not using that at all. So for the specular levels, I'm using 0.6, and then the roughness very, very, sorry, very small. That means it's basically like mirror. At 0 is basically mirror, right? There's nothing. So it's a very, very low roughness. And the index of refraction is at about like 1.36. And the thing about the index of refraction is this. Let's see if it's one of those. Not this one. I had one that was exactly that. This one. So you see like right here. Where is it? Where is it not showing? Okay. So I have like different types of refraction levels, right? So the corner itself, it has thickness. It has a little wall. So the corner itself has a 1.38. And then the little water that's inside of it, capturing there, is 1.34. I tried to do this in the past. I think it was during my Jessica, like my wife's portrait. I actually tried to recreate this during that portrait. And the difference was so marginal. It's like it's not worth the trouble, you know. I actually matched this 138 in here and 134 with an additional piece that was inside of it, kind of like a little bubble. And the final result was basically really, really close to the same thing. So instead of doing this whole thing here, I'm keeping like just one-sided. So there's no wall. It's just a single, you know, wall like you saw me building in there, just one side. And then I'm averaging the 134 and 138 and just doing 136. So basically this entire area, you just consider it's just like 136 refraction. And that's basically why I'm using 136 here. I did test and I tell you, man, I didn't notice a lot of difference, you know. Now for the transmission, that's an interesting one because now we're going to have to use a transmission map, which is like the transparency map in Arnold, to be able to create that blend area in there. So the scattering here, I'm using like for whatever reason, like this yellowish, but I don't think you need it. Maybe I was testing something else in here. Let's try just to see what happens if I do something like that. I don't think like it's going to be crazy. Yeah, it's not even changing that much. So let's ignore this one for now, this scatter part here, because I'm not using like any scatter anisotropy here. So that should be fine. So let's take a look at the transparency map. That's the one actually we are concerned about. So you see like it's very tight right now, and I don't like that. I kind of like the milky kind of transparency that we had before. This one here, right? It's the milky in there, so kind of eating up a little bit of that piece. So to do that, I'm going to just expand here to show what kind of map I have plugged. So I plugged the map here that's called AI ramp float. So what it is this thing here. So if you go to your hypershade, and let's just grab that eyeball shader. It's selected. I'm going to go to Graph, Materials, and Selected Objects. So I have this one here. And then remember before when I clicked to add like a ramp for the color itself, I went to Maya, right? And then Maya had the 2D textures, and I had like a ramp in there. But Arnold also has its own ramp. So if you go to texture here, actually it's not under texture, it's probably going to be under utility. So under utility, AI, what's that, like ramp float. So if you keep going down here all the way, you see like you have ramp RGB and ramp float. So ramp float, sometimes Maya gets in trouble like translating to Arnold, and it gets a little confused, and the transparency doesn't quite work well. And so that's why sometimes I decide to use like the float one, because it has like a bigger range. So like the transparency is nicer, and also it works perfectly with Arnold, right? So basically that's what I did. I created an AI float, and this one was plugged into the transmission, right? So if you look in the shader itself, that's basically what we have. If you click this one here, remember before I had a little checker. So I clicked the little checker, and I just introduced that AI ramp float from that same place I just showed you guys. So the way it works is a little bit different, right? The graphic in here is not a little, is not as much as the Maya one. This one has a curve that looks like this, right? And by default, it starts with either U or V, I don't remember. So you have to change to circular. And then the way this works is like this. So if I go like that, just to show more of the transparency. So if I do like a render time kind of rendering there, if I move this line here, look what's going to happen with the curvature. See, I start to eat up that whole thing, right? So you have to find a spot where you're not eating too much of it, and there's enough transition. But you know, it's like something like that is already better than that one. So this one is going to be the same thing. Like you're going to have to find that sweet spot. If this is too far, you're going to start probably seeing the edge of the transparent object. You see like right there? So that's basically the disk that we have underneath, right? We don't want to see that. So I'm going to bring this one back to the point that we are not seeing that disk anymore. You still see it in there. So I'm going to bring back like that. Then a little bit back. Do we have to find that little sweet spot? You know, it's like if it's too large, definitely not going to work for us. And then here I can start bringing this one more out again until I find that spot that has a nice transition with a little bit of the darker halo, but not too far. You know, it's like something, I would say something around here would be much nicer. And then let's bring this one even more back right here. Let's try it. If it's too much, let's do like full on to see how bad it is. It's not bad. I mean, something like that. So it's almost like a vertical line at this point, right? It all depends. I mean, like depending on the type of eye you're gonna find the references, sometimes you're gonna see more of that dark little circle around the iris, and sometimes it's gonna be very, very milky kind of looking, you know? So yeah, so that's basically the way I control this transparency. The important part is that you have to bring it back enough to hide like the disk itself, and the internal part, it has to be out enough in order to reveal a little bit of this darker part that's actually coming from the shadow from this object, which is transparent right now, combined with the dark edge that we painted in the map of the iris, right? So you're gonna get like a combination of that. So that one is already looks better. The eye itself looks very bright, right? Like the iris, so we can actually tweak that. But let's talk about the rest of the shaders in here. So this is the beginning of it. Basically, it's a ramp shader, a ramp map that's actually tweaking. If you look at this virtually, right, something like this. Basically, like the ramp is probably like working from here to here. So basically, creating just a transparency transition from this point to this point. So that means like you have to poke around with the curve, you know, so I can try to find those sweet spots. You can start with a very steep, almost like a step, so you can see exactly where it starts and where it ends, and then you start spreading out from that point on, you know, so you can actually see the transition and everything. So that's the first thing. So with specular, we spoke about transmission, that's the map we just added, like a AI float. I'm gonna close it here so it's not confusing. For the subsurface scattering, I'm using full-on subsurface scattering because you need scatter for the sclera. It has to look nice, you know. In the past, I would do the opposite of this. I would use like the scale if I was using like 0.13 for the face, for the skin. For the iris, for the sclera, I would use even higher, so 0.15 or something. But actually, I started to look at the lower values. I'm giving like a better result. And also for the radius, instead of using something that's more like peachy color, I'm using something a little bit more yellow because I wanted to scatter not so pink, you know. So a little bit more like a little bit more yellow would be good. So for the subsurface color right here is basically the map that we just plugged, right? The one we are playing around with, with the offset and stuff. So let's see, there's an offset in here. Let's bring it down. Oh, actually, this one is the okay. So this one here, if I turn off the offset completely, that's the color that's coming from ZBrush, right? So it's kind of, it's very, very saturated, right? Like around like there's a lot of reds in there. All this stuff is coming from ZBrush. So what I did here was actually just offset the whole thing to make it a little bit lighter. But this is kind of like a hacky kind of concept right here, right? To see how much brightness I have to get like a more like, to the point that I would like to see. Obviously, you can always do this as well. I mean, like, let's do this right now. Let's pretend you want some more brightness just around this halo here. You can do the same thing. You can do like in the color offset, you can click this little button, add a ramp from Maya. And then you can just switch to circular in here. And then you can get something like this. Look, you just like, I'm gonna crank it very, very strong step like that. So you can see where it is. See, that's around right there, which is a good spot actually. So from here, I can actually blend it back. Let's see what happens. It's actually the opposite, right? We need like the white to be here and the black around here. Yeah, that's right. So that's basically what I need. So I'm gonna just do this and bring it back a little bit like that. And then here I can actually bring back this to, actually not this one, the black one I have to offset towards white. So I'm going to desaturate it a little bit more. It's going to go lighter. Something like that, So basically you can actually tweak all those maps using like ramps and stuff like that. Or you can actually go back to ZBrush and, so I can just like repaint things. You can always do that as well. But this one is already kind of like, it's a little bit better than it was. If I want to do something like this, at least like has a little bit more of a more decent, let me try this. Yeah, I'm adding a little bit more color here in the middle. Otherwise, it's going to be too drastic. So a little bit more color. So let's go back in here again. So what I did here was just, it's like in the subsurface color, what I did was just to add the eyeball color, right? So like I add the eyeball as a texture. And then under the properties of the texture itself in the color balance, I just used a ramp for the color offset to just tweak that. And then let's see, like for the coat, I'm using like 0.120. Oh, the type of, obviously, always random walk to version 2 for everything, right? So for the coat, I'm using 0.120. So it's not a lot of reflection. And the roughness is 0.040, which contrasts with the specular here, that's just 0.008, right? I do that because when you look at reflection of an eyeball, you don't see like a super sharp line all the time. It's like, for example, a window. Sometimes it has a tiny little bit of almost like a diffusion in the edges. So I'm kind of simulating that. It's almost like a little glow around those edges by using a secondary specular. So instead of going like 700 something for the specular in here, I'm using 600 and adding another 0.120 from the second specular, just to have that little bit of glow you can see in there. So it's kind of like a double edge. And then here for the roughness, the index of refraction. This one, obviously, if you're using the index of refraction for the specular, you need to be correct because that's gonna really trigger like it's like the refraction of the eye, the freaking cornea, right? The refraction of the cornea. But then this one here, anything that's index of refraction in the coat part, this makes things more metallic. So if you crank, for example, like to, let's say like 4 in here, so things gonna get more metallic. You see it's not changing the reflection itself, the refraction, right? But if you go to crazy values in here, sometimes you can get something that looks very, very metallic looking, right? So that's why I'm using just 2, which is like, it's still like in the, you know, tolerable. It's not like metallic. It's still like kind of like more in the plastic kind of glass kind of, you know, kind of thing. All of the stuff I'm talking about here, you can start, for example, with the preset here. They have some good presets for glass, for example, right? So you can actually start with that one and just plug the map itself, but get some of the reflections from there. But definitely, I don't think they have something like those parameters I just showed you guys. I think this is more like stuff that I came up with. But yeah, so let's see. One thing here, let's just tweak that. I'm not happy with the color of the iris. So let's say like you're in the process of tweaking the iris color. It's going to be the same deal. You're going to go here. Let's go to the, we have the specular subsurface. So let's tweak the subsurface itself. Let's get this one. And I have that map that I have in there with a little bit of offset. So I'm going to remove the offset to get things a little darker overall, like that. And then here for this map, I'm going to bring everything down. So let's say something like this, and then something like this to get everything darker. Right, so I got a little bit darker now overall. Still, like, you know, I kept this one just to play around, just to show you guys the possibilities of shifting colors around without having to repaint in ZBrush, right? But yeah, in terms of the rest of the shader network now for the eyeball, let's see what's missing here. I think we went through the whole thing. Oh, there's one thing missing.
Chris,
Yes.
so you show us that you are having a second specular. So where can you create the effect of the parallax of the eye, when the fact that you, when you're looking at the eye from the side view, you can still watching the color, or I mean, it's kind of, I call it parallax because it's kind of tricky. I don't know how to explain myself, but it's the fact that when you're looking at the eye from the side view, you can still look in the iris.
Like that?
Exactly.
Yeah. So this is coming from the refraction index from the specular. Yeah. That's why we added like the 1.36 here. That's creating the refraction itself.
Oh.
Yeah. So there's a difference between this index of refraction in the specular and the one in the coat. For the coat, the index of refraction just makes things more metallic as you go higher with crazy numbers. But this one here is the one that actually creates the refraction, you know. So yeah, so that should work fine. Oh, and you saw like basically the displacement map that I plugged in here. It's the same displacement that came like from ZBrush, right? Like not the one we did today, but you see like those veins, they're important to be baked as displacement in there. That's why we kind of sculpted and painted at the same time in here, because you want to make sure that this is translated to the render, you know. It's very important, like when you look from a certain angle, to be able to see those glimpses of imperfections around, but without seeing any imperfection in the front, right? Like the front of the iris has to be perfectly clear. So that's important in there. So the last part here of the shader for the eye is actually under the advanced tab. Make sure you have caustics turned on. And then for the indirect diffuse, indirect specular, by default is like 1 and 1. It makes things very glowy, right? Like in general. That's why we kind of like tweaked the skin shader the other day to something like 0.3 to make sure that there's not a lot of bounce. So that means like when you get closer to another surface or like a crease, right? It doesn't go like super glowy in there. It gets like really dark. So I'm actually tweaking those values to something that, to my liking, but you guys can try other values, you know, but this one actually works for, you know, for my tests. And then let's see, under geometry, I don't have anything. Emission is not going to have anything. Shin doesn't have anything. So
does that solve the, you know, how people paint a fake shadow on an eyeball? Does that solve that?
A fake shadow in an eyeball? Oh, you mean like at the top under the upper eyelid? Yeah,
Yeah.
I would say it helps for sure, you know, because sometimes, yeah, if it's too glowy, right, like there's too much bounce, you don't get that little shadow in there. So this should help a little bit for sure. And so basically that covers like the shader for the eyeball itself. But then there's the last piece here of the puzzle, which is this piece right here. So we have our eyeball in there. And then if you follow those parameters, like for reflection and everything, you should get something that's very good. Now, there is another piece here, which is this guy here. And this is basically like the tier line, right? So the tier line, the way that I sculpted, you see, like it's a very simple geometry. I basically start like by snapping this to the surface. So you can create like just like imagine this built without this center line, so this without this edge. So you can actually just like start without that edge, and then you just build like polygon by polygon, just snapping to the surface, right? So to snap something to the surface, you do this. You just select the surface, and then you click this little magnet, right, in Maya. And then now if you select this, you can actually get like vertex, and then you can just click that one, and then it always snaps to the surface, right? So you can actually do this. Like I said, like just ignore like the center line, pretend it's not there. And then once you have this completely snapped like this, right, going around, then you can switch back like your face model. So let's see where the face is here. It's a good thing to name things sometimes, you know. Let's see, polysurface. No, it's not polysurface. I thought I had named face. Oh, face right there. There you go. I actually named it. So in this case here, now we would do the opposite, you know. So you would select the face itself, click the little magnet again, and then you would get like this outer edge right here. You would snap to that surface. So you do this all over, right? And get like first snap to the eyeball and then snap to the surface. You know, in the past I would just build the lower part, never the top part. But it's cool that you have the top part, because if you're doing like lower angle renders, it would be nice to see like the tier line in there, you know. So that's why I built that way. And then once you're done with that, then you can actually add this edge in the middle, right? So basically like you add an extra edge and then you tweak it. So basically I'm gonna turn off my snap in there. And then originally in the past, I would do something like this that was much closer to the eyeball. So we'd have like almost like a 90-degree like that. But now I'm actually making it a little bit more shallow. So actually it's filled with the liquid in there, right? So if I subdivide this mesh right here, it should get a little tighter. If it's not tight enough, you can do it manually. Just get like, you know, it's like move things around a little bit. So it's pretty tight against the eye. And then I'm gonna show you what I have in terms of UVs in shader for this, right? So for the UVs, if I look in here, modeling UV editor, it looks like this. It's a funny way to do it, but I tell you why I did this way. So check this out. It's a little bit more complicated than, you know, you can't potentially just do like a planar projection from here and then just do like a unwrap and you're done, right? But because I'm a pain in the butt to myself, I split this into two parts. So like the top part and the bottom part. And I actually made everything square. So I squared the whole thing, like moved all those vertices to look more square. Because my intention here is this. Imagine that you have like a line that connects like between the eyeball and the skin, right, around it. My intention was like, you know, it's like, what if I want to basically like blend between the eyeball and the skin perfectly? So my intention was to actually use like a gradient map that would start like black, white in the middle, and then black again here. So this part and this part would basically be blending things and it would completely disappear. And then the middle part is the visible part where you see the reflections and everything. So it's kind of like more like a perfectionist kind of thing. But it's not necessary at all. You guys can just do like I said, like, you know, if you want to try that way, that's, you know, up to you, but it's not completely necessary. It's a little bit of a pain to do it, just like to adjust the UVs, you know. But let's look at the UVs, the shader in here. So base, I don't have anything for the base because since it's completely transparent, everything goes gray. So nothing there. So for the weight, I'm using 1, so full on. Color white, and then roughness 0.005. Index of refraction is a little bit higher than the cornea itself. So from 360, I'm using 500. And then this anisotropy is right in the middle as well. So transmission, right? Transmission here, as you can tell, like my UVs are not being very useful at this point because I still have to apply that little map, right? That creates the transparency. So like I said, like at this point here, if you do exactly like I do, or if you just did a front projection with the unwrap, it should work just the same. The trick's gonna be the displacement or the bump map we're gonna be using. So the transmission basically like is full on. That means like it's not transparent at all. So if I look at from here, for example, do a quick render. Let's see what this is rendering here. It's really taking it's because it's loading the face now. That's why. That's why it's gonna take a little bit longer. We're gonna get there. Let's see. Kind of like working over time, but we're gonna get this. Yes.
Do you create like a displacement for the tear line, or it's just the shader?
No, there's either a displacement or a bump map. We're gonna get to this very soon.
Okay.
Yeah. It's just like loading the skin now, and you know, if it's loading the skin, it has to load all the maps.
Chris,
Yep.
sir,
Yeah.
after this, you can just show how the eye socket wraps up around the eyeball, because I'm having a little bit of trouble. Sometimes it seems it's penetrating, and if I try to adjust it, the eye seems quite a bit off. But if just once after you finish this, just for a second, you can show how you're wrapping the eye socket around the eyeball, right?
Okay. Yep. You can show that.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, it's like I can tell you that's kind of like that's the new kind of process for me to make this kind of like perfect match in there, and also have the caruncula built into the model. In the past, I would not be that careful, but at the same time, the results always looked a little bit weird. You know, it's like I never completely liked them, so that's why I'm trying to come up with a different way of doing it. That's so funny. That's like taking forever here. Let's just try to do this again. Let's just try to do like a little window like that and re-render to see if it pops somewhere. Oh, there you go. Now it's actually working. Okay, cool. Let's see this. I'm gonna just move it down here, if I can, to around the area where the tear line is. Right around there, right? So basically, like you see, there's a little bit of you know, it's not completely regular. It has a little bit of irregularity in there. And that's coming either from a bump or from a displacement map. So let's look at what we have in here. So that's the way it looks right now. And then, so again, the parameters here for the specular right there. Transmission 1. And then no subsurface gathering. The code is at 0.3 and then 0.004. So there's a little bit of a difference between this one and the 0.005 in there. Just create an extra, you know, little blend between them, but it's very, very small, kind of like a double specular. And index of refraction at 1.5. Chin, I don't have anything. Emission, nothing. And then I'm gonna have caustics. I have internal reflections on. This one has both indirect diffuse and specular at 1 as well. But then let's see it under geometry. Under geometry here, I have 2 different things, right? So the first one, that's what it is. Remember I mentioned like having a ramp map that would basically create like a blend starting at the top and then towards the bottom. So I'm not using that in the transmission map channel, because the transmission channel, when you make something transparent, it doesn't eliminate anything else. For example, like if you want to make a cup of glass, the reflections and refractions going to be all in place, and you're going to be all visible, but the rest is going to be completely transparent, right? So it doesn't eliminate the refractions. But if you add this same map under opacity here under the geometry tab, that hides everything. So basically, like everything becomes completely transparent. So that means like specular goes completely, disappears completely. So I plug this here basically. So imagine like if I open the UV again. So imagine this compared to that curve right there. So basically like the top in here you see like that my map is at the top of my UDIM, right? It's all the way at the top right there. So basically that's why you have this offset. So this represents the top of the whole UDIM in here. So imagine that little black in there is transparent right here. That whole portion that's white is like visible around here. And then around here is going to get transparent in around here again. So basically like this, you just like flip like 90 degrees, right? Clockwise. And then try to overlap that with this. And then you get like the mental picture of like, this is transparent from here and up and from here and down. And this is all visible in the middle. So that's to create like just this perfect blend. If you don't create, sometimes you're going to see a little edge, which should not be too bad, you know. It's like if you have enough reflection coming from the lid itself. But this way, I make sure that it's completely perfect. You know, it's like it appears and disappears like gradually, so it should be pretty nice blend in there. And then there's a bump applied here, which basically like you can use a displacement map. But if you apply a displacement map, for example, so the edge is going to be displaced, and it might be a little bit difficult to hide things if you have like a very wavy edge, right? So bump is not actually changing the geometry, but it's getting just like creating this impression in there. So for the bump map here, I'm using a noise, and that's the noise that comes from Maya. So if you go to Maya shaders and get the noise in here. And then for the parameters, I always switch this one. It starts with billow, and I normally change it to Perlin noise, right? Actually, I do the opposite for the most part, but in this case here, I think I did actually, yeah, I normally switch to Perlin noise. So Perlin noise, and then when you switch to Perlin noise, you get the different parameters. For example, Billow has this ones here, density, spottiness, blah, blah, blah. This one here is a little bit simpler, but I'm using those parameters. So the threshold is at 0, 1 for amplitude, ratio is at 2, frequency ratio at 2, and then the frequency at 5. You can play with those and see, you know, what type of, you know, result you get. But with this, I can get like just a little bit of waviness without being too crunchy. You know, it's like you definitely don't want to see like a lot of bumps, because that becomes kind of like an artifact. You want to be able to see like long strips of reflection, but without being something that's just a mirror, you know. So there's a little bit of a breakup, just enough to catch some highlights in there, but nothing too crazy. And for the UV coordinates, let's see if I'm using anything. No, it's just 1. So that's the default in there. I didn't play with that. So that's basically what I use. So just for the bump map itself. And then here there's the bump depth, right? Like if I use like I said, so if I have like this working right there, if I crank this one to 1, for example, which is the default, it's going to be much higher. So you're going to get a little bit more crunchy in there. So what I'm doing here, actually bring it down to 0.05 to preserve a little bit more of that almost like mirror looking. So not a lot of depth for the bump itself, right? So basically what I did, I plugged the noise into the bump value, but then the bump depth I actually kept very, very low like this. And then let's see if there's anything else in this shader here. So internal reflections, caustics, geometry is okay. Nothing thin film, this is 0. Emission should be 0 as well. Yeah, everything else should be good. So emission, thin film, and all this stuff is off. So everything you're gonna need is
that thin-walled checkbox do?
What's that?
The thin-walled checkbox?
Thin
Just-
wall checkbox. Oh, this one here? This one?
Yeah,
Oh, this one I think it's like it works. I don't remember like if this is for the thin film or the thin walled. I think it's for both. When you have like, for example, like soap bubbles, you know, something like that, you can get like to represent like the refraction correctly, just like with a very, very thin surface. But I don't think I used this one for this guy. So yeah, basically like that covers the shader. So geometry, you're gonna need both the opacity if you're doing the little trick of creating the little strip. Otherwise, you're gonna work fine. It's probably like just the blend's not gonna be perfect, but it's gonna work fine. The bump map is already there, and then the rest is just like coat, and then transmission at 1, and then specular, and that's about it. So let's see a little bit more from a distance here. If I render something like that. Let's get a little bit more of that carunculus, just very, very shiny there. Let's get something like that. yeah, this is the model that I started, you know, it was like I started tweaking stuff and then trying to get some new things in there. And then I kind of like stopped because of the class, but my plan is to go back to it. I was starting to like, you know, the super flashy, shiny curriculum here built into the model, but that transition in there is not working very well. So I'm probably going to have to paint in ZBrush, remove some of that darkness from the map itself, and then do some, you know, better paint, I would say, would save a lot of headache in there. But let's talk about this blend that you mentioned about the eye and matching the whole interior. I think like what I did, it was actually, you see like the topology of this perfect sphere inside of the eye here. It's because I actually started with the eyeball itself. I started with the eyeball itself, and then around this area here, I made a hole, and then I blend. You know, it's like that pain in the butt that we know, right? Like about topology, you have to actually plan the
Sir,
whole thing. So yes.
that's kind of funny because this is the way I do it, like from before. But
Uh-huh.
the thing, the eye socket, the outer part of the eye socket,
Mm-hmm.
I almost have most of the time trouble like wrapping it around the eyeball, because sometimes without the eyes it seems kind of the way you taught. I'm trying to follow along and I want to match it, like the slope it is there. But
Uh-huh.
when there is, I just have a proxy for an eyeball. I haven't created like the proper eye right now.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
when I wrap it around, it seems like it's bit off, like from the top. If I try to match it from the bottom, it's
Uh-huh.
off from the top. If I try to match it from the top, it's the other way around. So I am having quite a bit of a hard time how to wrap it around the eyeball. Like yours seems almost perfect. So I was just curious how you did it.
Yeah, it's like the thing about like I think the first thing you have to take a look is that the position of the eye from like a profile. Let's see the profile right here. The position of the eye in relation to the eyelids from profile, it has to be a little bit higher, right? So basically, like if the corner of the eye is right here, instead of like having the iris right around here, it's actually rotated upwards slightly here in this case. But you see, like it's a little bit higher than you would expect. So like that's the first thing that's going to help you to create like this, you know, it's like a slight slope in here. So the upper lid's going to be a little bit more forward than the lower one. And then, so that would be the start. And then the second thing that I did was actually to pay attention to this little bulge in here and try to represent that as a match as well. Because what happens when you try to render something that has intersections at the top, I mean, like if you render something like this, you should be fine. But every time you try to render something from below like this, if there's any intersection between this part and the top, you end up like having some very ugly artifacts. You know, this one has a tiny little bit in here, but it's almost spot on. I mean, like it's a little tweak. Sometimes what happens is that you're working with the model without the subdivision, and then you subdivide and things pop in a slightly different place, you know. But I think what I did first, I found the spot that I thought the eyeball looked the most correct, and he started with that, you know. So from that point, I just like you know, it's like copied it. So basically, like this one here had a one subdivision level lower than the eyeball itself. So imagine the eyeball being one subdivision level lower than this, and then I chopped this made a hole basically around here. So like this is the eyeball right there. I made a hole around here, so I could actually create this little perfect blend and just like add all those edges to match the same topology. So I counted it to make sure that I had the same amount of edges to match the eyelids around it. So everything here basically like radiates from the eyeball that's inside in there, right? And then once I had that cut, before I attached to the surface of the rest of the face, I actually shrink wrapped this one into the eyeball first. And then that was a perfect match. And then I started changing things here and adding the rest of the forms. And at the end, I got the eyeball and I just like shrank just a little bit just so it doesn't have an intersection between the two objects, you know. But I mean, like, there's not a lot of science behind it. It's just a matter of like trying to work smart with, you know, it's like the way you're gonna build it inside. So it matches the best you can, you know. But yeah, it's just like it's how I felt about doing it. This is what I mean here. I mean, like you see, like there's this offset in here. This is gonna cover the cornea area. If I had like an intersection, the refraction is here would cut part of the iris. It would look very weird. And when you look at the actual pictures, you actually can see the iris from below because the refraction is actually still, kind of pulling it out. So you can see from the refraction there. So if you don't have the little bulge built in, you're gonna have some weirdness in there, But yeah, I mean, like all you can do is try to do like as perfect as you can, Um,
Sure, sure, sure.
yeah.
Thank you, sir. This solves a lot. I think I had the placement of my proxy a bit
Uh-huh.
off. I think that's the main reason, but this explains a lot.
Okay.
Thank you so much, sir.
Yeah, no problem. So yeah, that kind of covers a little bit of the eyes, but obviously, like in the next days, now that we have all those pieces, right? We have the skin shader right now. We have the eye shader, and some tips about like how to approach like the building of the eyeball, so like the main part. And then I didn't do like a tutorial about like how to build the iris geometry, but visually you can definitely see that's a very simple geometry. We kind of like even create like a simpler version here for you to see how it looks like, right? Like from like a very simple geometry like that. And then with the little video tutorial in there, like seeing the time lapse, I think is going to be very helpful about how to approach those forms. And then to this point here, if you want to do something that's super detailed, is up to you, But all the previous portraits I ever done, it didn't have all this detail. It was more like this with a little bit more detail than that. Most likely the exactly the same as the little mini tutorial, the time lapse. So, and it still renders pretty nice, It's like you can always simulate, for example, those tiny little tendrils in the texture itself. And another approach you can do here, if you're a little bit lazy, is to go to the internet, find a nice iris that you like, right? And you can bring it to ZBrush, for example. You can use your I always forget about the name of it, like Lightbox. I barely use Lightbox, and actually project
Spotlight.
this. What's that?
It's Spotlight.
Spotlight, yeah, Spotlight. That's right, not Lightbox. The Spotlight, you can actually use it to just like project that texture. I did it in the past actually for something I was doing at work. I brought an iris, and then you can project into the model as a texture, and then you can select by hue, for example, or by intensity. I think you select by intensity, and then you can generate a mask, and then you can start sculpting from that. So you can get a lot of the main spots for the cavities from that. And then from that point, you can just like refine it. That's kind of like a quick start kind of thing. I think it would be faster for you. But if you want to exercise and just like sculpt by hand, like I did, it's another way to do it as well. But yeah, like that's basically what I had for today in terms of eyes, And so, like I said, like tomorrow we're gonna be starting some XGen. Is gonna be like the very beginning of it, and then from that point on, tomorrow probably going to be building what? Like it's going to be like peach fuzz, and then like the simplest stuff first, like baby stubble, peach fuzz, and then the hair nose. And then from that point on, we can actually go to something more complicated, which is going to be, so tomorrow is Thursday, right? Yeah, tomorrow is Thursday. And so for the next week, we can start actually doing like eyelash. Actually, let's start with eyelashes tomorrow and see if we can get some of the eyelashes done first. I think it's more, a little bit more useful for you guys like to play with during the weekend. And then like the peach fuzz and stuff like that is much easier to do anyway. And so we're gonna go like between tomorrow and the next week is gonna be the peach fuzz, the eyelashes, the hair groom. Like the main hair groom is gonna come like next week between Monday and Tuesday. And then everything else, I mean, like all the stuff we were talking about gonna have to come together as we keep advancing, right? So if there's any question coming up, like in the next couple of days, for example, oh, the eyeball I did this way but didn't work, or the shader is not working for me for whatever reason, we can keep like revisiting those things, right? And making sure that we're all on the same page with those tools. And then in terms of detail and how much detail we're going to be able to capture for any one of those elements, it's really up to each one of us, right? How much far we're going to push like the detail of the iris, if it's necessary or not. How far we're going to be pushing like the detail in the skin itself, right? Up to us. How we're going to be painting the maps for the sclera, up to us. But again, like if you want, you can always like, I'm not going to say cheat, but you can use like, you can sample some images to help you out with all those passes, so I can and get things done faster. But if you can take this as an opportunity to actually learn how to paint things manually, I think as an artist, it's kind of like it's a cool way to get into this, fascinating world of like recreating things by hand, you know. But again, like this is the context of the class. Obviously, later on, if you're in the studio, you're probably not gonna want to do this way. You probably want to do like the fastest possible way because you know, there's a deadline and stuff. But as an artist, I think it's very important to exercise those things. Anyway, thank you guys again. And seems like I don't know, like in the past, seems like I was having like an easier time to actually keep up with the content I have to show. I don't know if I'm getting more detail in the way that I'm explaining, or if I'm just like rambling more these days. I don't know what's going on, but it seems like I had an easier time to actually end the class at 10 on the dot, and everything would be covered. This one I could barely finish, you know, it's like a part of it, like around 10. So I had to go over another half an hour, but that's part of it. Anyway, thank you guys.
Okay, awesome.
Yes, appreciate you,
Thank
Chris.
you very much.
No problem.
Thank you.
I'm getting
Thank
old,
you.
man. Just getting old.
But you're getting better, sir. Much better.
I hope so. Thank
Fine
you.
wine.
Thank you,
Thanks.
sir. Thank you
Thanks,
so
guys.
much.